Okay, dear friends, can you hear me now? Yes, Fernanda and Murtaza, you are nodding. So thank you very much for the morning, and thank you for the organizers for the opening session, and very much welcome to this thematic session. I hope everything is technically working well for you and that your connections are fairly stable. As we know, the theme of the first session is causes, scale, and impact of hate speech targeting minorities in social media. As we heard this morning, it is a very topical item, and even more so, as our special rapporteur Fernand de Verens said during the opening session, double virus is hitting minorities, also virus of hate speech and virus COVID. And we have heard also many thoughtful interventions this morning with relevance of the theme, especially the lack of disaggregated data. And as it was said and has been said, underreporting of the scale of hate speech for many reasons. That is why it's so important that we focus on this theme, the scale and the impact and the causes. And also, in order for us to fulfill the intention of this forum, to convey more exactly the magnitude of the problem and recommendations how to remedy those problems. Let me repeat some rules for the conduct of the session. We will start with 10 minutes presentations from our experts. Then there is a possibility for us to comment on that. Unfortunately, one of our experts, Nursan Kaya, is not able to be with us today. We send our best wishes to her. Well, when the experts have spoken, you participants will take the floor. And you must use the raise hand function in the Zoom platform. Of course, we are using a little bit of different devices, but in a most used device, you would go to the participants and then you see the different functions like raise your hand, yes, no, but we use the raise your hand to get the floor. I will announce when you can start asking for the floor with the raise your hand. Also, we will be clocking your interventions because, as has been expressed also by the special rapporteur and many others, it is important that so many as possible have the floor, and therefore we limit the intervention to 2 minutes. I cannot assure that you would get the floor a second time, so please, I hope you can make your points and the recommendations during the 2 minutes. If there is another round, I will announce it later when we have the clocking. And when you have the floor, please introduce yourself. Who are you? Whom are you representing? And if you are from an organization or something like that, also that, but which region or country you come from. And as I said, it is important that we provide the global forum with recommendations, so concentrate on them. And you should submit your recommendations through the chat function that you also find at the bottom of the screen. It's open to all participants to be engaged during this forum, as Director Biro said this morning. I maybe have committed a crime against it myself, but please speak slowly because there is interpretation. And also at the bottom of your screen, you will find a symbol that enables you to have interpretation. English, Russian are the other languages we are using. The session will be streamed and recorded, as you have said. And now I see that many of you have followed the instructions, meaning that you are unmuted when not having the floor. You will be unmuted when you get the floor. And the recommendation is also that all of us cannot have the cameras on. If there is time at the end of the session, I will also give the floor to the panels to react on some of the recommendations. It is important that we contribute constructively to the discussion along the themes that are in the program. And it must be, the interventions should be relevant to that particular theme. I cannot stress it enough. It is also, you are also encouraged not to read from advanced prepared written statements and to provide concrete recommendations on how to tackle the issues. But in order to have a fruitful and meaningful exchange of views, we expect that all participants show respect for other views and to invite all participants to exercise their speeches with that. Avoid abusive or disrespectful language or derogatory and inflammatory remarks. We must set the tone when we are talking about these issues, and respect UN core values and principles, and uphold UN standards when referring to countries and territories. Because also during this panel, we cannot have points of order or the right to reply. So with these words, I'm very happy to invite our first panelist, Dr. Murtaza Shaikh, who is really a specialist on online hate speech, minority rights, and social media, including content moderation. He's co-director of AROES, I hope I pronounced it correctly, a British Muslim policy think tank, and is finalizing a publication on incitement to religious hatred and Islamophobia under UK law and international law. He is also now focusing on online user-generated content, in particular in relation to UK Online Harms Bill and Facebook's new oversight board. He has been relied on as an expert on many occasions, maybe especially I note that he was also relied on by the late Joe Cox, MP, and also Home Affairs Committee, Law Commission and on Human Rights Mechanism at UN and Council of Europe. He advised the Organization of Islamic Cooperation and also has been active in conflict prevention, initiative on quiet diplomacy, and litigated cases in front of the European Court of Human Rights. Finally, he holds a PhD from SOAS, and his thesis was on protection of religious minorities under international law and Islamic law, also graduated from ESSEC University. So, Dr. Murtaza Shaikh, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Astrid. You can hear me, yes? That's good. Yep, the voice is okay?
Are you heard?
I said, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Yes, we can.
Oh, okay, thank you. Okay, just wanted to check. Thank you, Astrid, and I would like to thank the Special Rapporteur for driving this bold initiative, and also the Tom Lantos for their hard work in organizing the regional forums. Before any meaningful discussion around international standards, mechanisms, or other institutional responses can be undertaken, I believe the nature and extent of the problem should first be understood. Now, in that context, it's important to connect hate speech, online hate speech specifically, to the issue of minorities. Let us be clear, social media companies may share partial responsibility for the impact of hate speech on minorities. However, they cannot so easily be accused of being its source. Hate speech or incitements to hatred and violence against minority groups are actually a reflection of a state of a given society and potential tears in its social fabric. Just like conventional media, social media can also inadvertently normalize, catalyze, and embolden others. hatred that they may have been inclined to otherwise. So what is it specifically about minorities that makes them prone to hate speech as opposed to others? I would posit that they're at a far higher risk of being made the victims of severe hate and violent speech. As such, they're at the worst risk of ethnic-based violence, and even in extreme cases, genocide, as we have seen with Rwanda and more recently with Myanmar, Sri Lanka, and Xinjiang in China. They're also attacked based on their group identity, often as a collective, as opposed to just differing protected characteristics. Now, I'd like to focus on the scale of the challenge and, just to try to frame it. So for July 2020, the most popular platform for social media was Facebook, with over 2.6 billion active users. That's over a month. YouTube had 2 billion, Instagram 1 billion, TikTok 800 million, Snapchat and Twitter 400 and 330 million respectively. Just to put that into context, that's over a quarter of the world's population and around 3/4 of all smartphone users globally. And obviously these numbers are all humans, not just adults. So amongst adults, the proportion will be even higher. This hateful content on these platforms is posted in real time. It's accessible internationally in an instant without any filters, such as the nature of user-generated online content. The challenge of scale is real, and I believe it has no easy or the live stream Christchurch shooting in New Zealand and other individuals committing suicide using the Facebook Live feature are cases in point of the real world harm that can result from on these platforms. Even with the resources and the wealth of the social media companies, it is not really possible to identify and remove harmful content through human means alone, or prevent it from being posted in the first instance. In response to the Special Rapporteur's question as to our preferred relationship with social media platforms, I would say we should try our best for it to be a partnership. The Christchurch Call and the EU Code of Conduct on Countering Illegal Hate Speech are examples of this. And I feel the social media companies are willing to cooperate and to collaborate. The biggest downfall on their part is that a lot of it is done from a reputational perspective and as a reactive measure, as opposed to a proactive, strategic approach. Now, one issue that I would like to take up is connected to scale is sorry, if there's someone who hasn't muted their microphone, I'd appreciate it if you could mute it. Thanks. So in relation to linguistic diversity, the challenge of scale is actually mirrored in the linguistic and cultural diversity of user content, which is often overlooked because we often look at these things from a sort of Anglo-centric perspective. Let us take Facebook as a case study, which is actually reflective of the dynamics that are present in other social media platforms. In 2019, Facebook supported 111 languages on its platform. Now, according to some estimates, there are over 7,000 languages spoken in the world. But let's put that to one side and discuss research that says that there are 31 additional languages that are very regularly and consistently used on Facebook, which are not supported by Facebook. Now, when it comes to content moderation, the community standards, the rules that govern hate speech, are only translated as of 2019 into 41 languages. Automated systems of content moderation, i.e. non-human, only operated in 30 languages for hate speech specifically, and human moderators amounted to 15,000 proficient in 50 languages. So we can see there's a disparity between the languages that Facebook functions in, the languages it moderates in, and the languages that it has the rules that dictate the moderation available in. So you could argue there are parts of the world where there is no access or understanding or comprehension of what the rules are, let alone whether there is any certainty of what's being said is against or not against the rules. And in many cases, minorities don't really know they have a recourse to appealing or complaining to Facebook on many of these issues. To demonstrate this, the number of hate speech removals in the most recent community standards enforcement report for Facebook showed a jump from 9.6 million to 22.5 million. That's also around 10 million to around 23 million removals. Now, did this mean that over a period of 3 months, there was a sudden explosion of hate speech globally, mostly aimed towards minorities? I'd say no, this is not what happened. What actually happened was this doubling was down to an expanding of the automatic detection technology to Spanish, Arabic, and Indonesian languages, and improving language capabilities of the automated systems in English and Burmese. So this hate was already there. It just wasn't detected. This begs the question of how many other languages, if incorporated into the automated systems, would uncover the scale of the hate speech that is in operation globally today. Clearly, this suggests the languages I mentioned, Burmese, Indonesian, and Arabic, suggest strongly that there may be associated minorities in states where those languages are spoken. So connected to this, I think there's a dire need to disaggregate the data that the social media companies are now very helpfully publishing on a quarterly or 6 monthly basis in the case of Twitter. And the disaggregation should be along the lines not just of hate speech, but it should be subdivided into the protected characteristics which are being targeted with this hate speech, so we can see which of it is directed at minorities. We should also be able to see the severity and the types of hate speech that are being widely used on social media, so we can understand the scale and the type and the location of the problem aimed towards, directed towards minorities. It would also help to know the ideology or the group affiliation of the main perpetrators in as much detail as possible. And a related point to this is that we need to move. It's really good that we've got to the point where we're talking about how many proactive removals there are by social media companies of hate. From 2016, where there was hardly any, and everything was down to users flagging content. That's great. But now we need to move to the next stage, which is the accuracy of those removals. And to be able to disaggregate the types of those removals and who they're aimed towards. Now, when it comes to the idea of accuracy, this takes me on to my next point, which is there needs to be greater transparency around definitions, interpretations, and application of the community standards or community guidelines of these social media companies. They've really come a long way. And even though hate speech has no agreed definition, it has quite a broad definition in the guidelines of social media companies, which is very much aligned with the UN Secretary General's definition in his strategy and action plan, which is a direct attack on those with protected characteristics. However, the interpretation of these standards and the application of these standards remains opaque and inaccessible. We need these social media companies to be able to have proper courses of appeal, to publish case studies of cases that they decide, especially on contentious issues, and for us to know internally what sort of elaborated interpretations they're applying to different difficult cases. And a very pertinent point related to the community guidelines, as broad as they are, is that the protected characteristics at present do not align with the grounds of non-discrimination found in international human rights law. They're not as expansive, and they're not non-exhaustive either. The most notable exclusion is that of linguistic identity, which means that the three conventional types of minorities that we have in international law are religious, linguistic, and ethnic. Linguistic is excluded from protection of hate speech removal for these social media companies. Therefore, it's not measured in the metrics either. So just to conclude and recap on the specific recommendations I'm making as a result of my presentation, is that the linguistic diversity of the user base of these social media companies, which exceeds and is nearing 3 billion, should be accommodated, incorporated. Clearly, the technological leaps that need to be made are significant, but they are being made and they need to be accelerated. Human moderators should be increased. Proactive work should be done in relation to where hotspots are likely to occur, such as in pre-election and post-terrorist attack scenarios. And we really need to have the community guidelines translated in as many languages as possible, because if there is no access to the rule, then there is no, there is no legal certainty or certainty amongst any of the community that what they're saying or not saying will be allowed or disallowed. Hate speech removals data needs to be disaggregated, especially along protected characteristics, and the definition, interpretation, application of standards should be elaborated and made transparent. And it would also help if there were 2 layers of appeal as opposed to 1 layer of appeal. Otherwise, prospective regulators and oversight mechanisms such as the Oversight Board and Ofcom will be inundated with appeals. They should only be dealing with contentious cases. And additional point, which I didn't submit, apologies to Tom Lentos Institute, which I think is quite important in relation to very acute situations relating to minorities where violence may be imminent or likely on an intercommunal level, is that the social media companies should have a council of minority representatives and experts where it is believed that minorities are most at risk, so that they may act proactively, but also be cognizant of the contexts of language and political realities in those places. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your, I must say, very interesting presentation and concrete suggestion on how things are moving. And we will come back to certainly the discussion will come back to your your suggestions later on. So thank you very much. And now I have the pleasure and honor to introduce our next expert and panelist, Dr. Kyriaki Topidi. She is currently researching on minority identity and digital governance, as well as on the intersection of minorities with social movement. She's head of research of the research cluster Cultural Diversity at the ECME European Center for Minority Issues in Flensburg, Germany. She has lectured extensively, researched in this area, European law, humanitarian law, comparative law, international law, and held research and teaching positions. She is the author of numbers of articles, you will find it, and her latest monograph focuses on the right to difference and comparative religious diversity in education, appeared this year. So, Dr. Kyriaki Topidi, I will give you the floor, and as well at this point also announce, as I said, that you participants, we are now over 100, can use the function under participants to raise your hand to ask for the floor. So please, Kyriaki Topidi, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Astrid, and thank you to the organizers for the opportunity to be here in such an exciting forum. Since Murtaza spoke mostly and addressed the issue of scale, I will try to cover a bit more of the other 2 elements of our thematic session, namely causes and impact. Racism, xenophobia, discrimination against nationality, ethnicity, and religious faith persist as the main motives behind hate speech, with groups as such as the Roma and the Sinti being consistently attacked, and anti-Semitism and Islamophobia persisting, if not expanding. I think it suffices to have a very quick look at the 5 cycles of evaluation reports that came out from the European Commission on the Code of Conduct to confirm that finding. At the same time, We have other measured trends in online hate speech, which signal the emerging relevance of multi-ground discrimination. Hate speech and hate incidents, are more broadly grounded on more than one motive. We heard earlier on about gender, but it's not the only possible combination. We could have race, religion, and gender, for example. So intersectional approaches to hate speech are thus becoming, I think, a necessary framework for us to understand the phenomenon. Interestingly, race and religion, in many respects, appear to often merge when we draw the lines of inclusion and exclusion of individuals and groups. There is also additionally a shifting emphasis in research towards the study of the impact of hate speech as opposed to its grounds only, in order to show what was already mentioned earlier, how more disadvantage arises from the way society relates to particular individuals rather than their inherent characteristics. So some groups, as was rightly said, are subject to more hate speech or qualitatively more extreme hate speech. But harm also depends on the features and functionalities of internet platforms themselves. For example, the scale of their audience, you got a taste of that in the previous presentation, but also the permanence of the content posted. But what I find particularly alarming is a further trend which concerns haters and how haters are challenging the line between what is legal and illegal in skillful ways. The language used is either trivialized or manipulated to express unacceptable ideas in quote unquote acceptable terms in order to avoid obviously censorship. Just to give you a simple example, tweets without explicit hate keywords are hard to detect and classify and therefore go unnoticed. It is also more and more visible how the far right has explored the internet as a hub of mobilization, propaganda, and cultural subversion in the European context. Just to give you again a sense, now the latest research suggests that these kinds of, if you want, parties, formations, associations, not only use words, but they also use images, mimes, to spread the message. So it's not just about words, it's also pictures. Finally, the empirical realities of hate speech online indicate that anonymity in the digital environment facilitates the spreading of such expressions, usually within social networks that allow it. So this only indicative list of legal and policy challenges is rooted in an understanding of hate speech as an expression of a culture that emphasizes conformity, tradition, and the mainstream. It is also largely connected to global economic crisis and the considerable increase of the number of refugees and immigrants across the globe. It allows the maintenance and further spread of discrimination, precisely because it is based on the perpetuation of socioeconomic inequality. Alongside it, the rise in popularity of far-right political parties across Europe has signaled what has been labeled by previous speakers as the normalization of such a discourse that in the past was considered unacceptable. So in other words, socioeconomic instabilities and uncertainties, together with technological advancement, should be at the core of a regulatory environment addressing harmful online expressions and practices, especially since, as we know, the current digital ecosystem appears to be struggling to fill its own gaps through self-regulation. Now, this is in part because evidence on hate speech is too fragmented, too incomplete, and inadequate for us to understand the degree and patterns of online abuse. Again, indicatively, how much of the content hosted by mainstream platforms contains abuse? We don't know. What triggers most hateful content? Is it politicians or is it terror attacks? Again, we don't know. In one of the rare occasions where data is available and which refers to the UK, according to the 2019 Oxford Internet Survey, 30 to 40% of people in the UK alone have seen online abuse, and 10 to 20% have experienced it by priority according to criteria such as ethnicity and age. So data allowing for a detailed and comparable mapping of trends, I think, is still largely missing in most national contexts, but desperately needed. The regulation of hate speech, however, is much more complex than the international legal framework applicable may suggest, as we heard about it this morning. The impact of hateful expression in general terms strives to dehumanize, that was a word repeated a number of times, the targeted groups and or their individual members, but often adds a dimension of reverse in-group identity for those that perceive themselves to be under threat. And here, as a result of that, they express hate towards others. And the typical example is white supremacy. The problem is that both of these aspects are particularly hard to regulate, especially because we don't have a universally valid definition of hate speech. For online hate speech in particular, social network platforms have added to the difficulty of the task by creating what is now called the space for hateful messages to proliferate. So addressing hate speech online calls for the consideration of the specific characteristics of the interactions that have been enabled by digital information and communication technology. At the same time, however, the task dictates also a case-by-case treatment because haters, minority groups, national and cultural context and platforms are not all the same, obviously. Essential differences between the regulation of online and offline hate speech are to be found in features such as the permanence of online content, potential anonymity, as I said earlier, of speakers when they post, the cross-jurisdictional nature of competence on regulating online expressions, the fact that these expressions can move, they are itinerant, but also the speed of the circulation of online content, which was also mentioned. So depending on the structure and functions of each platform, you can have a scenario where hateful expressions remain on the web for longer, see Facebook, or reach broader audiences, for example, Twitter. They can also be moved to other less or differently, more loosely regulated platforms if they are removed from one. So in that scenario, the position of ethnic, racial, and religious minorities in the digital public space is clearly one of vulnerability. They are faced with bias, invisibility, linguistic obstacles, which we heard about, and these groups have therefore micro-targeted to maintain their weaker socioeconomic position. So online hate speech ultimately obstructs their opportunity, but also their capability to participate and access political, social, economic, culture, and other instances for expression. Ultimately, hate speech also impacts their standing in society, specifically and particularly for those of them whose voice is not heard, or who have been targeted unfairly by digital hate by preventing their civic engagement and participation in public affairs, in online public life, as it is now labeled. So engagement with social media extends beyond political participation, and I need to stress that because it exposes the vulnerability of minority groups and the bias they are experiencing to the point, up to a point which was mostly observed only in the offline world. What that means in practice is that they have limited opportunities to become visible on social media and to make themselves heard and their identity affirmed. Limited access takes the form of access to the internet itself, access to information, to education, to social media literacy, as well as social segregation, which are all additional factors placing minority communities across the globe at a position of disadvantage. But I think if we are to give a more holistic approach to the question, we need to consider other concerns which are linked to online speech moderation. For example, devising internal community standards or terms of use, which is how online platforms moderate, has been found to be a necessity for purposes of certainty, equity, and transparency. Yes, that is correct. But maintaining and upholding these standards towards all users without exception would be the logical next step. Any different approach creates two levels of inconsistency. One, which is the prioritization of the speech of certain people, example, politicians, over hate speech moderation. And second, between free speech and non-discrimination and equality. It is this kind of hierarchization of speech that penalizes the less powerful voices. So without clearly stipulated legal frameworks, and here allow me to add one thing, we have not touched upon the fact that very often there is a divergence between national legal frameworks and the international legal standards, and that is something that isn't consistent everywhere. So without clearly stipulated legal standards and frameworks, and policies that are paced with how society and the digital world evolves, I think that the regulation of hate speech is bound to be reduced to piecemeal remedial solutions. Removal, moderation, and distribution of content by intermediaries in unequal and disproportionate terms for various reasons may and does impact adversely racial, ethnic, cultural, linguistic minorities. There are still, however, essential ways that social media platforms can use to bring together minority or marginalized groups. And my main suggestion was here to reinstate civic dignity. All in all, how do we do that? By alleviating the damage that is caused through regulatory solutions. All in all, a holistic approach as it impacts ethnic and religious minority groups depends on other factors, and I will briefly mention them. The organization of online platforms is the starting point, but we also need political will to address the phenomenon. As reflected in decision-making, we also need institutional adaptiveness, for example, more effective and consistent data gathering, but we also need if you want to address cultural trends, such as the rise of right-wing groups and public discourse, in particular public speech from politicians in the media and citizenship involvement and participation in identifying and reporting hate speech. So we live in democracies that speak without listening. My proposal is to invest further in the already impressive exchange value of messages within social media platforms, but this time to listen more than to speak. With those thoughts in mind, I would like to briefly introduce the following recommendations. The first would be that states should determine and act upon the particular responsibilities of authors of hate speech, along with those of internet service providers and social media platforms that they're doing already. The second would be in cases where authors and disseminators of hate speech are anonymous, states and internet service providers should ensure the availability of avenues for the disclosure of identity of the speakers. States should provide in their criminal, administrative, legal systems standing and support for those targeted by hate speech to bring proceedings that seek to delete and remedy hate speech within reasonable time frames. We are starting to have case law on that, the Facebook case. Stakeholders should promote the governance alignment between laws and regulation of government authorities and content moderation. And finally, my fifth would be that stakeholders should contribute to the improved coverage, comparability, and quality of government statistics by encouraging standardizing reporting from large tech companies, including search platforms. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Tubidi. That was very extensive and very interesting recommendations and insight on the scale and the impact. As I said, you could raise use the raise your hand function, and I have not been counting how many have raised their hands, but just as very quickly, I see visually that there seems to be a lot of still space to ask for the floor, and I would then proceed to the first hand I have seen here in the list of speakers, and it is let me see. It is from the Civic Chamber of the Russian Federation. I cannot see the CSO, Civil Society Organization. So please, you have the floor. If you now, I tried to unmute you, but that is not working from my distance. Let's see if the Tom Lantos Institute can unmute you. Is it there?
Abazer, if you could please unmute yourself. We've sent you a request to unmute yourself.
Mm-hmm. Why?
Добрый день, уважаемые господа.
Yes, we will go to the English
Да.
translation. Yeah. Yes.
Видео не показывает видео, поэтому я хотел бы в аудиосообщении сделать свое выступление. Для начала хотел бы представить несколько норм Конституции Республики Крым, действующей у нас с 2014 года уже в Российском Крыму. В статье 10 Конституции Республики Крым установлено, что государственными языками в Республике Крым являются русский.
I'm sorry, we are not using the UN language Republic of Crimea.
Да, я представляю Республику Крым, национально-культурная автономия, болгарская национальная культурная автономия. Я руководитель болгарской национальной культурной автономии. Поэтому я хотел бы процитировать ряд статей Конституции нашей республики, которые гарантируют права соблюдения полностью наших прав по изучению родных языков и так далее, и так далее. Поэтому я хотел бы процитировать сначала наши статьи нашей Конституции. В статье 10 Конституции установлено, что государственными языками в Республике Крым являются русский, украинский и крымско-татарский языки. При этом признается принцип многообразия культур, обеспечивается их равноправное развитие и взаимообогащение. Далее, статьей 13 Конституции гарантируется равенство прав и свобод человека и гражданина, независимо от пола, расы, национальности, языка, а также от других обстоятельств. Запрещаются любые формы ограничения прав граждан по признакам социальной, расовой, национальной, языковой и религиозной принадлежности. И, наконец, в статье 19 Конституции установлено, что каждый вправе определить и указывать свою национальную принадлежность. Никто не может быть принужден к определению и указанию своей национальной принадлежности. Каждый имеет право на пользование родным языком, на свободный выбор, на право использования родным языком, на свободный выбор языка, общения, воспитания и обучения творчеству. Как представитель болгарского национального меньшинства в Крыму заявляю, что какие-либо ограничения прав национальных меньшинств на получение образования, на использование родного языка в качестве языка общения, воспитание и творчество отсутствует. В нынешнем Крыму существует реальное равенство прав и свобод граждан вне зависимости от национальной либо языковой принадлежности. Сегодня любое национальное меньшинство в Крыму имеет юридические и фактические возможности обеспечивать общение своих представителей на родном языке, обучение на нем и иным образом использовать родной язык. Примером тому является существование и деятельность общественных организаций национальных меньшинств: болгарская, армянская, греческая, немецкая, крымско-татарская, украинская и многие другие. Действуют воскресные школы, группы изучения национальных языков, существуют национальные средства массовой информации, даже театры и музеи, имею в виду прежде всего крымско-татарские. В то же время не могу не выразить свою озабоченность положением болгарского этнического меньшинства в Украине, которое преимущественно сконцентрировано в Одесской и Запорожских областях. Болгарское меньшинство образовалось вследствие переселения болгар в границы Российской империи в XIX веке. Исторически сложилось, что никакого украинского языка на таких землях не использовалось, поскольку болгарская община внутри себя использовала родной язык, а средством межнационального общения и взаимодействия с органами власти являлся русский язык.
And unfortunately, I did not hear any recommendations. I urge the participant to give recommendations, and I'm sorry that you did not.
Нет, мы готовы рекомендации сказать. Поэтому
This you could put it in the chat function. You could put it in the chat function when your time now is over. And I urge the El Saltier from the World Jewish Congress to continue. And you could unmute yourself, please.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. During the COVID, my name is Leon Saltiel, and I'm the representative of the World Jewish Congress in Geneva. During the outbreak of COVID-19, absurd falsehoods, conspiracy myths, anti-Semitic and racist statements were disseminated via the internet. These range from misleading information regarding the coronavirus and related health measures to attacks accusing Jews and other minorities for supposedly having created and propagated the virus. We have observed that the extensive use of new technologies by many has allowed the dissemination of hateful rhetoric on online platforms. Right-wing extremists are also taking advantage of these new tools to spread classic anti-Semitism linked to the coronavirus, in addition to anti-Black, misogynic, and homophobic sentiments. Unfortunately, hate speech does not stop online, but it leads to tragic consequences offline. For example, the perpetrators of the Christchurch and Halle attacks, which led to the senseless murder of dozens in place of worship, promoted their neo-Nazi doctrines online before taking action, broadcasting their atrocities live to glorify hatred. They aim to exploit new technologies to incite others to commit violence. We owe it to these victims to take concrete actions and enact legislation that will lead to the swift removal of offensive material. The United Nations, governments, and civil society must find ways to utilize and incentivize these new tools to promote ideas of peaceful coexistence. We need to better leverage and regulate modern technology to oppose extremism and prevent radicalization. At the same time, these phenomena reveal great flaws and deficiencies in education systems around the world. Young people lack critical thinking, digital literacy, democratic citizenship education, and basic empathy towards the other. It is high time that governments around the world prioritize equipping their youngest citizens with the tools to be able to confront and oppose these messages of hatred and division, and not be susceptible to racism and anti-Semitism, conspiracy myths, and words of bigotry, as revealed by the present crisis. I thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much for your intervention, and please could you also fulfill the request by the organizer to put your recommendations in the chat function of the Zoom, because you had clearly recommendations on digital literacy among other things that I would then suggest you will do. Next speaker is Sashik Sultan Basid, Yazidi Center for Human Rights. Please, the floor is yours. And recommendations in the chat function of this Zoom application.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Dear colleagues, I'm Sashik Sultanian, the head of Armenia-based Yazidi Center for Human Rights NGO. In the modern world, targeting the human rights defenders of national minorities on social media is a big challenge, because it is not only a challenge for defenders, but also for the people who strive to solve their issues through raising them. Despite the positive public attitude towards the national minorities in Armenia, the efforts of state officials in certain spheres targeting against Yazidi human rights defenders, and particularly against Yazidi Center for Human Rights NGO, has been launched since May. Individuals and organizations started spreading fake news about the work of the Yazidi Center for Human Rights NGO, accusing it of spreading ethnic and religious enmity. This is particular about the veto movement, which by targeting Yazidi Center for Human Rights NGO, in particular its leader Sashik Sultanian, is trying to disrupt their activities by spreading disinformation, describing them as Western agents harming Armenia's national security. These individuals and organizations distort the idea of protecting the rights of national minorities and present the protection of minority rights as threats to the security of state. All this spreads on social media, demonizing not only the organization which is engaged in protection of the rights of national minorities, but also endangers the free operation of human rights defenders. Freedom of speech in social media is being used to target human rights defenders and freedom of speech. To stop this, we recommend the government of Armenia to take effective measures to ensure the freedom of expression and guarantee the operation of organizations engaged in protection of the rights of national minorities. To prevent the activity of far-right groups aimed to target national minorities and human rights defenders dealing with issues of national minorities. To bring the issues of national minorities to the public agenda and have concrete opinions in issues affecting the quality of the life of national minorities. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your intervention. And I continue to request that you submit your intervention in the chat function, like the previous speaker did, and we are collecting that. I also noted that you raised a very, very central issue, which can also be noted when we talk about minority rights. Minority human rights defenders are quite often the target of this speech. So, and there is also a need, unfortunately, once more to remind all speakers about the need to respect the UN language when you are talking about territories and countries. And I have to interrupt if that is not taking the place. I see that there is Andrei Zarenkov has asked for the floor. Please, could you indicate whom you are representing, if you are representing anybody, and also the region from where you come.
Благодарю вас за доставленную мне возможность выступить перед столь большим и интересным сообществом. Меня зовут Андрей Заренков, я живу в Эстонии, я являюсь членом Международного совета российских соотечественников за рубежом. Очень важным для противостояния распространению языков ненависти, как мы считаем, является четкая и недвусмысленная позиция государства проживания крупнейших общин национальных меньшинств. В Эстонии русскоязычные люди составляют почти четверть населения страны. Это 300 тысяч человек. Мы всегда выступали в защиту образования на русском языке в государственных и муниципальных учебных заведениях, за создание специальных программ, учебников, за расширенный доступ к участию в культурной жизни нашей страны. И мы поддерживаем усилия нашего государства по финансированию средств массовой информации, медиа, которые публикуют или транслируют контент на языках меньшинств. Мы давно выступаем за более широкое предоставление доступа к финансированию русскоязычных мероприятий для поощрения культурного разнообразия. И мы просим Европу оказать нам содействие в использовании языков меньшинств в государственном управлении, государственных структурах и судебных органах, в торговле и защите прав потребителей. Что мы знаем о страданиях ребенка, который попадает из своей семьи, из атмосферы родного, домашнего языка в чужую языковую среду? Да, конечно, учителя сделают все, чтобы ребенок побыстрее интегрировался, но стоя одной ногой в своем доме, а другой в школе, не все ведь могут так быстро к этому привыкнуть. Поэтому мы рекомендуем найти возможности разработать конкретные, долгосрочные, особые условия в поддержку школ национальных меньшинств. Однако в Эстонии в этом году закрыли русскую школу в маленьком городе Кейла. И родители, наши родители, проиграли этот суд. Заканчиваю я тем, что в странах Прибалтики, близкие к правительственным кругам, люди пытаются создавать удобное для правительства мнение по поводу положения национальных меньшинств. Так появился Эстонский центр по правам человека, который участвует в подготовке отчета для ООН по соблюдению прав нацменьшинств. Если в ООН начнут сравнивать этот отчет с тем, который представляет государство, то там нельзя найти никакой разницы, кроме расстановки запятых и некоторых эмоций. По отчетам следует, что чаще всего к правозащитникам обращаются с жалобами на плохую доступность медицинской и социальной помощи. И я заканчиваю. Одна из моих рекомендаций состоит в том, чтобы в Европе стали напрямую общаться с национальными меньшинствами и знали о наших истинных проблемах от нас самих. Большое спасибо вам, что вы выслушали меня.
Thank you very much, and I hope that Also, further interventions will concentrate on social media. That is one of the things we would like you to do, to respect the 2 minutes deadline. And please, when you speak, I hope you could not only turn your microphones on, but also, if it's possible, the video to be turned on, just the speaker. And now I give the floor to Anton Korinevchik from Ukraine, please.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. My name is Anton Korinevich, and I'm a permanent representative of the President of Ukraine in the Autonomous Republic of Crimea. Today, I'm going to talk about incitement to hatred by social media against Crimean Tatars, ethnic Ukrainians, and religious minorities by the occupying authorities in the temporarily occupied Autonomous Republic of Crimea and the city of Sevastopol. Starting from the beginning of occupation of Crimea by the Russian Federation, there has been a splash of hate speech used in the media landscape of Crimea, mostly against the ethnic Ukrainians, Crimean Tatars, members of the Majlis of Crimean Tatar people, journalists. Crimean Tatars, representatives of the indigenous people of Crimea, are mainly depicted as radical Islamists and extremists, and their representative body, the Majlis of the Crimean Tatar people, is depicted as an extremist organization. There are constant parallels between Muslims and terrorists. Jehovah's Witnesses is considered as extremist organization. Crimean Diocese of the Orthodox Church of Ukraine is subject to continued administrative and judicial pressure by the occupying power. In most cases, hate speech is used in the newscast and information and analytical programs aired on Russian TV channels broadcasting on the occupied Crimean Peninsula, as well on the websites of the Crimean mass media, social media, including the websites of the state bodies of the Russian occupying authorities. The hate speech situation in the media landscape of temporarily occupied Crimea continues to deteriorate and demands further support, in particular, to raise the public awareness about the consequences of the Russian aggression in the occupied Crimea, in particular in the sphere of hate speech, to call the Russian Federation to observe international humanitarian law, international human rights law in temporarily occupied Crimea, and comply with the obligation to protect the civilian population from acts of violence or intimidation and insults that are often present in hate speech, not allow discrimination of civil population in Crimea based on race, religious, or political convictions. And finally, to promote access of the established regional and international human rights monitoring mechanisms for observing the human rights situation in the temporarily occupied Autonomous Republic of Crimea and the city of Sevastopol, which of course is Ukraine, but unfortunately is now temporarily occupied by the Russian Federation. I thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, and the same request goes to you. Your suggestions for recommendations, especially on the impact, the scale, and the reasons for the hatred against minorities. And I think we can remind you also of some of the interesting things that were our panelists, our experts said. There was, for instance, that the lack of the linguistic minority on social media as a category, the suggestions to have better information on anonymity, what should we do about that? Should we have more information on groups of perpetrators, this kind of disaggregated data that we are lacking? So I would just mention some of the things we do need. Then I will give the floor to Ms. M. Kirmasiarik. I do not know what the abbreviation stands for in your request for the floor, but you may introduce yourself, please.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. I cannot start the video. Sorry for that. Okay, now I think it works. Okay. I think my video is not working. Okay. My name is Melek Kırmacı Arık, and I represent the Federation of Western Thrace Turks in Europe. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can
Yes.
hear you.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. My name is Melek Kırmacı Arık, and I represent the Federation of Western Thrace Turks in Europe, an NGO representing the Turkish community in Western Thrace, Greece. And as noted in the background document, discriminatory practices and hateful messages serve to stigmatize those perceived to be the other and the foreigner. And most of those targeted by these messages are minorities across the world today. And the situations involving persons belonging to national ethnic groups who constitute the numerical majority in one state but the numerical minority in another state engage the interest of governmental authorities in each state with the potential to escalate. In Greece, the status of the Turkish community in Western Thrace is established by the Lausanne Peace Treaty, and Greece only recognizes a Muslim minority in Thrace and denies the existence of an ethnic Turkish minority in the region. And hate speech is a part of structural and systematic discrimination against persons belonging to the Turkish community. When the Friendship, Equality and Peace Party joined in the EP elections in 2019 and received overwhelming support in 2 provinces, the party president has been a target of a hate speech on social media and online media. And nothing about the situation of the Turkish community in Western Thrace has changed into better. Since the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic, intolerant discourse and this scapegoating of minorities has been observed in Greece. And the province of Xanthi, where almost half of the population is Turks, was among the top 5 provinces that was most affected by the COVID-19. And when the village was quarantined in the country, on the same day, the head of the far-right Greek Solution Party said on Twitter, Ehinos is in quarantine, Ankara's spies live there. And the statement by the head of the far-right party is a very clear example of institutional racism. And Greece and all other European states must address this very important issue and dedicate a special effort in order to increase reporting and punishment of hate speech on social media. Thank you, Madam Moderator.
Thank you, and please put your recommendation or your information in a succinct way to the chat. So thank you for that. And now we'll see we have Tibor at Toro Bolvanus Institute. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I represent the Balványos Institute, which is a think tank from Romania. Our institute, in collaboration with the Institute for Public Policies in Sfântu Gheorghe, carried out a complex research program on online hate speech targeting Hungarians in Romania. And an important result of this research was that while social media did provide the medium for different actors to distribute stereotypical representation of minorities, their activities did not explain why these messages find resonance in the larger public. So an online survey we conducted said that 34% of our respondents thought that Hungarians would not accept Romanians as neighbors, and 40% believe that they would not accept them as workplace superiors, while the majority of Hungarians have Romanian neighbors and workplace superiors. Many of them even have Romanian family members. So this negative image of Hungarians as hostile toward Romanians in the online realm is cultivated through more traditional media of knowledge production, namely textbooks used in public education. So we analyzed all 75 textbooks of history, literature, and civic education used in the Romanian public education, and we found that although most textbooks had chapters of multiculturality, they usually discussed it as a global phenomenon without any reference to Romanian realities or minority-majority relations. Most textbooks promoted the monoethnic concept of the Romanian political community, and the minority contribution was de-emphasized. And in civic education, there was no talk about minority-majority relations or in linguistic rights of minorities. And historic textbooks only discussed Hungarians as exclusively has historical enemies of Romanian people. So what we propose as recommendation is hate speech can be fought indirectly also by reforming textbooks, and clear standards should be elaborated for the evaluation of textbooks from the perspective of intercultural education. And analyzing the legislation is not enough in this case, but a standardized content analysis of existing textbooks is also needed. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you for your presentation, and I see that you have recommendations ready, some recommendations ready. We could also note that Council of Europe is working in this, thinks of working in this area according to what we heard this morning. So it will be very helpful. I would then also call upon Imre from Milkormre Association CSO. Please, Imre, are you there?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Good afternoon. I'm speaking on behalf of the Mico Imre Association for the Protection of Minority Rights from Romania. Hate speech targeting the Hungarian minority and fake news meant to perpetuate stereotypical images, although limited to a few TV shows, social media, and sports events, are unfortunately not uncommon in Romania. Cases of hate speech that our organization has dealt with have almost exclusively occurred during debates over the issues of language rights, education in Hungarian, and the teaching of the state language, symbols of the Hungarian community in Romania, and discussions about territorial autonomy in regions where Hungarians constitute the majority, including the most prominent case of hate speech in recent memory when, in April of this year, the president revived a nationalist myth that paints Hungarians as a group that is conspiring against the national interest. Our complaints often result in fines from national level institutions. The toolkit of these institutions is, however, quite limited. The fines are symbolic. A research conducted by the Balványos Institute and the Sector Institute for Public Policies looked at attitudes on the part of the majority population in connection with some of these issues and found that negative attitudes are quite prevalent, with almost 30% of respondents saying that minorities in Romania have too many rights. The majority of respondents also rejected most minority rights in practice, both in general and when specifically asked about the Hungarian minority, with more than half saying that Hungarians should not be eligible for election to public office, that they should not be allowed to study in their mother tongue in school or university. Some of the most negative attitudes appeared when respondents were asked about Hungarians using their mother tongue in public institutions, with only 21% answering in the affirmative. A comparison of the findings of this survey to results from previous years show that there is no improving trend in Romania with regard to the attitudes of the ethnic majority towards the rights of minorities. These findings are mirrored in the scale and the intensity of xenophobia and hate speech that is exhibited both on broadcast and online media in connection with these issues. Stereotypical perceptions and dismissive attitudes towards existing rights or the idea of broadening minority rights are also undoubtedly reinforced by the recurring xenophobic discourse. As for recommendations, the protection of free expression under human rights law, as many of the panelists already said, means that legal remedies can be applied only in the most severe cases. However, as outlined in the OSCE's Tallinn guidelines, this does not mean that states have no other tools for combating hate speech. Indeed, addressing the root causes of hate speech in the long term can be achieved through educational, informational, and awareness-raising measures. Specifically, when it comes to education, the history and culture of minorities should be more prominently featured in the school curriculum of majority students in order to counter stereotypical and negative images about minorities. Majority students should also be given the opportunity and encouraged to learn minority languages to facilitate a better understanding of these minorities. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I now note that we have very many requests still for speakers, so I encourage you to hold to the 2 minutes limit. And Zet Sautieva is the last speaker that I can allow, and I must say that there will not be another round of speakers when I look at the timetable. So I now would give the floor to Mr. or Mrs. Segries from Crimea. I urge you to hold to the official UN language as to your intervention. I cannot see any.
Mrs. yes.
Please, could you put your camera on as well? Your camera on, yes.
Добрый день, уважаемые коллеги. Меня зовут Чернец Роман, я руководитель белорусской общины Крыма. Белорусы – 4-й по величине этнос из проживающих в Крыму. И мы, крымские белорусы, вместе с другими этносами, проживающими в Крыму, ощущаем на себе методы давления, которые по отношению к нам пытаются применить ряд иностранных государств. И особенно один наш очень недружелюбный северный сосед. Добрый день. Конечно. Меня зовут Чернец Роман. Конечно, отдельно... Что такое? Конечно, отдельно хотелось бы, стоило бы отметить сильнейшее информационное давление, основанное на множестве абсолютно несуразных фейков. Например, отрицание нашего красавца Крымского моста и прочие подобные несуразицы. Наверное, западные налогоплательщики должны задаться вопросом, а что все проблемные вопросы внутри их стран уже решены, и можно миллионы долларов тратить на выстраивание целой системы СМИ и фондов, направленных только на антироссийскую риторику и фабрикование фейков о Крыме и России. Может, лучше заняться улучшением жизни граждан в своей стране? Ну, наверное, это риторический вопрос. К сожалению, уже давно и планомерно против крымчан особенно усиленно проводят антигуманитарную политику различных геноцидов власти Украины, которая пытается лишить нас всех прав человека из-за нашего выбора в 2014 году. Энергетическая, торговая, водная, продуктовая блокады Крыма – это прямое нарушение Украиной своих правозащитных обязательств, закрепленных в международных документах. Особенно актуальна сейчас водная блокада. Право человека на воду – это обязательное условие для реализации требований, направленных на соблюдение человеческого достоинства, которое также неразрывно связано с правом на жизнь, обеспечение гигиены и питания. Все эти блокады нарушают Международный пакт о гражданских и политических правах, Международный пакт об экономических, социальных, культурных правах, где, среди прочего, речь идет о праве на достаточное питание, свободу от голода и справедливое распределение мировых запасов продовольствия, Конвенцию о правах ребенка и Конвенцию против пыток и других жестоких, бесчеловечных или унижающих достоинства видов обращения и наказания. По сути, настоящая демократия только в Крыму и в России, где власти услышали голос народа и его желания. Референдум в 2014 году был проведен с соблюдением международных демократических принципов, проявлением народной инициативы. Участие граждан в референдуме было добровольным и свободным. Я считаю жестокую дискриминацию по любому поводу неприемлемой, поэтому приглашаю прагматично настроенных западных политиков и общественных деятелей лично посетить Крым, услышать мнение крымчан по поводу того, что происходило в 2014 году и как они чувствуют себя сейчас, узнать, что происходит между Украиной и Россией, по мнению жителей Крыма. Всем давно пора осознать, что независимым, а затем российским Крым стал по воле народа, населяющего полуостров. Мы, в отличие от Украины, готовы к общению. Я, как белорус по происхождению, возмущен...
Yes, please. Now you submit your recommendations in the chat function, and I will give the floor to Mr. Kalmar of Hungary. Mr. Kalmar? Mr.
Hello.
Yes.
Do you hear me?
I hear you, and if you still also put the video, start the video.
I try to put the video, yes.
Mm-hmm.
Got it.
But the main thing is we hear you. Thank you, and please,
yes.
The floor is yours.
Just a moment. Okay.
Yeah.
So now you can see me also, and I can see you also. Thank you very much, Madam Chair, Mr. Special Rapporteur. Since it's not the first time that we meet, both with Mrs. Tors in Vienna a few years ago and with Mr. Fernando Varen also 1 or 2 years ago, we met in Kolozsvár, Cluj, if you remember. So the title of this thematic session is Causes, Scale and Impact of Hate Speech. What I would like to focus on are the causes, because very few people who spoke before me spoke about education. I think that only the two experts coming from Romania. So the question of education is very, very important and is at the basis of all this hate speech, because a very well educated and normally educated person cannot be influenced to do hate speech or to go on with his opinions in that way. And regarding education, the basic subject in schools where identity, the national identity of a person, of a child is formed, is history. So history education is a basic thing. And I think that if the history teacher could teach a certain historical event in such a way that not only he presents not only the interpretation of that event from one side, but to tell pupils all the interpretation of all the parts which were of all sides which were involved in that event, then I think that after one, let's say 2 generations, we could reach the situation in Europe, for instance, or in the world, that people, young people can work together and can be partners for each other.
Thank you, Mr. Kalmar. Could you submit your recommendations?
Yes, yes. So what I would like to recommend for the special rapporteur is to make recommendations for history teaching in schools. This can go together the observatory which will be formed the Council of Europe. But if you could also do or enforce this initiative, that would be very good.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Submit your suggestion, and then I give the floor to Kerem Abdurimmecoglu of the VTMU.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. Kerem, please.
Yes, Mrs. Moderator, thank you very much for the floor. My name is Kerem Abdurrahimoğlu, and I am representing the Turkish minority of Western race in Greece. It can be said that hate speech tendencies in Greece show substantial increase in recent years. Western race Turkish minority suffers very often from hate speech of extremist groups. Writings like "Turks out of Greece" or "The best Turk is death Turk" on the streets can be seen every corner of Western race. However, several years ago, such an extremist slogan was expressed by a famous Greek politician and former minister, Mr. Pangalos, as well. In addition, an online Greek media platform, namely Turkish News, added a new dimension to well-known nationalistic discourse of local Greek media towards Turkish minority by sharing profiles of minority individuals, those who liked or shared posts regarding Turkish history. These actions of these websites can stigmatize and makes the members of Turkish minority an open target for extremist groups. Another striking example is the recent demands by nationalist environments for deprivation of citizenship rights of those minorities who declare themselves as Turks. Online Greek media platforms featured on denial and marginalization of every self-identification. These actions of its minorities. Most recent example on this is statement of former Greek President Mr. Pavlopoulos on a webinar with teams of Lausanne that he openly asked from the Greek public isolation of minority members who bound themselves with Turkish national identity. Thus, it can be said that intolerant minority policy of Greece opens the way and creates favorable conditions for hate speech tendencies by extremist groups. As natural consequence, increasing hate speech tendencies in Greece is likely to turn hate crimes as well, putting in danger the lives of minorities and other disadvantaged groups in Greece. Therefore, we call upon the Greek state to recognize Turkish national identity of the minority by giving up marginalizing them and take necessary measures for protection of its minorities and other disadvantaged groups from such hate speech and their natural consequences. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And then we have the Murali Shanmugamlan from the International Dalit Solidarity Network, please.
Yep. I hope everyone can hear me.
We can hear you. We cannot
Thank you.
hear you. Yeah.
Madam Chair, thank you for the opportunity. I represent the International Dalit Solidarity Network, an organization founded in 2000 to advocate for Dalit human rights and to raise awareness of Dalit issues. I'm not going into details about what a caste system is, even though I assume many people know caste system is one of the oldest form of discrimination, surviving forms of discrimination in the world. And what we would like to propose, IDSN wants to propose to recognize, acknowledge, and include caste-based discrimination, especially caste hate speech, a protected characteristic similar to race, gender, and sexuality when developing the EU hate speech framework policies and regulation. One may ask why caste in the EU? I take this next 1 minute to explain that. The European Union has consistently recognized caste-based discrimination and violence against Dalits in the business and economy, and most importantly, in everyday practices. So the EU has taken an official stand to fight against caste. However, the European Union has yet to develop a concrete policy-oriented action plans to address caste-based discrimination, caste hate speech, especially within the EU or when dealing with caste-affected societies. The UK, for example, the UK government's Equality Act 2010 has also recognized caste as a protected characteristic. And the UK racist religious hate crime, the prosecution guidance recognizes caste is a protected characteristic when probing a hate crime incident. The point I'm trying to drive home, caste is no longer actually a problem of traditionally caste-affected societies. In a globalized world, as people from caste-affected societies migrate to Europe and other Western countries, caste-based atrocities and discrimination are now extended to Europe, the UK, and other countries. Second, as digital spaces are agnostic to physical geographies, social media platforms, online content that come under the EU regulation is not exempt from caste hate speech from caste-affected societies. So in sum, IDSN proposes the following recommendations to be considered by the regional forum, and then it should be passed on to the European Union agencies as well. Number one, acknowledge, recognize that caste is a protected characteristic. Number two, recognize caste hate speech is a distinctive form of hate that merits attention from and by international agencies such as the UN Minorities Rights Group, EU, and other INGOs. Third, advocate that digital tech corporations should be sensitive to growing online caste hate speech and support that measures to address these are incorporated into corporate human rights due diligence processes and requirements. And I will send this document, I'll share this document here as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for the concrete recommendations and that you made the link also to the forum's agenda. I now give the floor to H. Simoyan from Armenia. Please, the floor is yours and unmute yourself.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Can you hear me?
We can hear and see you.
Thank you. I represent the Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Armenia, Madam Moderator. First, I would like to thank the organizers of the Regional Forum for the opportunity to exchange views on this urgent issue and the experts for their insightful presentations. Combating hate speech is a pressing issue for the international community, as gaining a disturbing scale, it threatens to undermine the stability of societies. At the same time, it is imperative to set up clear red lines between the hate speech and the freedom of expression, while bearing in mind that freedom of expression is a necessary precondition to effectively counter hate speech and make positive changes in the mindset of societies. When used systematically and state-sponsored, hate speech may have devastating consequences, perpetrating crimes such as genocide. And it is extremely worrying that, disregarding this fact, in some countries, political leaders glorify and promote the perpetrators of hate crimes, thus creating a fertile ground for their recurrence. Saying this, the Republic of Armenia would like to propose the following recommendations. First, to the states at the national level, to accelerate efforts to combat negative stereotyping and discrimination against communities on the basis of their ethnicity or religion and other grounds. raise awareness on the political, social, and cultural rights of those communities, including by using the social media, to promote the culture of peace, dialogue, and cooperation through inter alia human rights education, to develop national legislation addressing hate speech with the engagement of minority groups' representatives, and to bring to responsibility the perpetrators of hate speech and hate crimes in order to put an end to impunity. And also, we would recommend to respecting international organizations the following. First, to condemn in strongest terms the instances of hate speech against minorities, conduct monitoring and evaluation of the situation in relation to the incitement to hatred offenses through periodical data collection and analysis, and also to provide necessary support to states for capacity building to address hate speech. I thank you.
Thank you very much for your intervention. And we have now S. Satuyeva from Solidarity, W Solidarity. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My name is Zarina Sautieva, and I represent the informal platform of the Women of Caucasus, W Solidarity. Apart from discrimination on the basis of ethnic and religious belonging, Caucasian women regularly face up in the Russian society. They have to tackle with discrimination and stereotypes within their closed and traditional communities. There are many examples when women in the North Caucasus have to end up with their creative, public, and political activities, or when they are forced to leave their republic or even country because of social media hate speech campaigns against them. Mainly this is linked to the stereotypes about the role of a traditional Caucasian woman in the society who is not welcome to freely and publicly express her opinion. This becomes obvious when one looks at the huge gap between men and women in leadership roles in the Northern Caucasus. According to the latest statistics, nowadays there is no single woman represented as a head of government in the North Caucasian Federal District. From all mentioned above, we would like to give the following recommendations to the Russian Federations, as well as to the United Nations and Council of Europe. Provision of fundings for local initiatives and projects aimed at fostering non-formal education in matters related to women empowerment and leadership that eventually will lead to the improvement of an overall image of the Caucasian women in the Russian society. Introduction of a lesson of ethnography and culture of the peoples of Russia into the basic school program. Allocation of financial support for women activists, in particular human rights and arts activists in the Northern Caucasus. Comprehensive study of the problem, description and classification of hate speech related cases targeting women in social media, and implementation of educational programs for journalists, civil society activists, and representatives of human rights organizations aimed at explanation of the scale and consequences of this phenomenon in order to cope with it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now we have actually reached the time limit of our panel discussion. If you allow me, I would ask for one short 1 minute remark by both our experts. And if you take the reverse order, if Kyriaki would like to have the floor, it's not compulsory to do it, but if you would like to make some reflections on the recommendations made. The floor is yours, Kyriaki.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Great, great. Just very briefly, the points that I take from this kind of exchange is that we are privileging here as entry points to combating hate speech education, but we seem to not realize that we need to superimpose digital literacy on top of that. So I think these two go together when it comes to the online dimension of hate speech. And then the second issue, which I find fascinating, is the transnational effect. So the Dalit case, which I think is worth pursuing. We are looking at the phenomenon which doesn't know borders. And as such, we have to treat it in a very different way from a regulatory perspective. And then the last point I want to make is intersectionality. The gender aspect, I think, is also extremely important and merits a lot of attention. That's it. That's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Murtaza, would you like to have the floor? Murtaza.
Yes, 1 second, yes. Thank you for giving me the floor just for final comments. I'd say the thing that is quite striking for me, a number of things. Firstly, that we're discussing social media and hate speech, but we must never forget that the root causes of many of these things are societal, and we need to deal with them before we talk about the vehicles for expressions being disseminated worldwide and causing harm. Some of the things that were raised, such as historic education, I believe is very important to deal with some of those root causes. And I also like the point about being very robust about the protected characteristics that we include in defining hate speech online, such as caste-based and, as I mentioned, linguistic, and there are others that should be added as well to bring them in line with international human rights law. And the final thing I'd say is that regulatory approaches provide a way forward in relation to increased transparency by these social media companies. The more transparency we have, the more effective solutions and strategies we can come up with. But obviously there's a great challenge there because of jurisdictional questions. Is the jurisdiction extended to companies which are in certain countries, or it's based on users? So those are difficult questions that need to be answered. Yeah, thank you very much.
Well, thank you all of you who have participated in the debate. You must forgive me if I allowed a little bit too much of discussion of other not related to hate crimes and hate speech, but still, as Murtaza mentioned, it is the reality that is reflected in social media. But we have got many draft recommendations, and we know that we will hear the special rapporteur later on when he comes out with his view on what would be the recommendations from this forum. So I would like to thank you very much for these interventions, and thank you especially to our panelists. Excellent insight, real experts with new things for many of us. Also, thanks to the technical team of Tom Lantos Institute and to the interpretation. It was working also, I would say, very, very, very well, very professional. You will have the next session in a little bit in 25 minutes. And we know that will be also a very interesting session on the international legal and institutional framework, when we can go then forward to the remedies. You all deserve a pause, especially our interpretation and the technical team, and looking forward to listening to the coming discussions. So thank you very much. And it will be 15 hours Central European time that the session is reconvened. Thank you very much.
So good afternoon, everyone, or wherever you are, depending on where you are, good day or good evening. Dear Special Rapporteur, nice to see you on the screen. Excellencies, organizers, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the second thematic session of this regional forum, which is devoted to the international legal and institutional framework of the topic of this forum, namely hate speech, social media, and minorities. My name is Francesco Palermo. I'm a professor for comparative constitutional law in the University of Verona and head of the Institute for Comparative Federalism at URAC Research in Bolzano, Bozen, and I have a few current and past international positions as well. The topic is, I would say, too interesting to just select a few thoughts to restart this section, because actually even in what has been said in the previous panels, very many inputs have come, and I think also very valuable suggestions for the Special Rapporteur in terms of recommendations to be drafted out of this forum. So I would abstain from making an introductory presentation, and will perhaps seize the opportunity to make some comments here and there after the presentations of our distinguished panelists. They will have, let me remind the rules of the game, 10 minutes for their presentation, and they will deal with the subjects area in different geo-juridical spheres, the UN first, then the OSCE and the Council of Europe, so going from bigger to smaller geographically. Let me also remind you a couple of technical information which are very important to all those who wish to participate. The session is live streamed on YouTube, and it is recorded, so whatever you are going to say remains. Interpretation is provided, English, Russian. If you want to speak after the first round of intervention by the panelists, you just have to raise your hand, and I will try to accommodate all of you. This goes for both the speakers and the participants, and of course not least for the moderator. Please speak slowly to make interpretation easier. Now, we have three very outstanding speakers in our session. And as I said, they will deal with the different regional dimensions of the international and legal and institutional framework. I would like to start with Sejal Parmar, who is a lecturer at the School of Law at the University of Sheffield. She teaches, among other things, international human rights law, and is especially expert on freedom of expression. She held a number of previous positions, including being a senior advisor to the OSCE Parliament representative on the freedom of the media, and is currently member of the Council of Europe's Committee of Experts on Combating Hate Speech. She will be dealing with the UN framework mostly, and without further ado, I would like to pass the floor to you, Sejal. Thank you for keeping your presentation within the limit of 10 minutes.
Thank you very much, Francesco. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you to the UN Special Rapporteur on Minority Issues, the Federal Ministry of Austria, and the Tom Lantos Institute for inviting me to be part of this very important panel today at this regional forum. So over recent years, the pressure on social media companies to address online hate speech on their platforms has undoubtedly intensified, including here in Europe, with political leaders, religious figures, and civil society organizations calling on social media companies to take action against hate speech. Governments have sought to hold social media platforms responsible for online hate speech that is deemed illegal through far-reaching legislation that has been widely criticized, particularly from a freedom of expression perspective. Germany's NetzDG law, which came into effect in January 2018, has provided a model for other countries. France's Avia law was adopted by the French Assembly, but then declared mostly unconstitutional by the Constitutional Council back in June. And on the 3rd of September, the Austrian government presented its Communication Platform Act, or COPG. The EU Commission has also indicated its intention to address hatred, violence, and insults which do not amount to unlawful hate speech through the Digital Services Act, due to be presented later this year. At the Council of Europe level, as you've already heard, the Committee on Combating Hate Speech has been established, and it's set to begin its work next week. Against this backdrop of legislative action and anticipation of more in Europe, and also beyond, European policymakers must remember that it is the established international human rights framework that provides the global standard for states in Europe in crafting their laws on hate speech, including online hate speech, but also to global social media platforms in developing and applying their content moderation policies. So what does this international human rights law framework look like? Before I set that framework out, I would like to emphasize that the rights of persons belonging to minorities are clearly undermined by the dissemination of online hatred, but also by overly broad legal measures in response. In other words, both online hate speech, but also disproportionate restrictions on online content can have the effect of chilling, censoring, and silencing the expression of persons belonging to minorities. As the 1992 Declaration indicates, persons belonging to minorities have a right to express their characteristics and to develop their culture, language, religion, tradition, and customs, a right which critically implicates the human right to freedom of expression. So turning now to the relevant international human rights framework. There is no legal definition of hate speech as such in international law, yet international human rights law indicates that states should respond to different types of hate speech differently. And the key term in international law is incitement. I like to see this as 3 levels of hate speech. At the top level, there is the severest kinds of hate speech, which must be prohibited by states as a matter of obligation. Such expressions include direct and public incitement to genocide, as defined under international criminal law, and also any advocacy of national, racial, or religious hatred that constitutes incitement to discrimination, hostility, or violence under Article 20 of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. Whether an expression of incitement to discrimination, hostility, or violence is severe enough to amount to a criminal offense depends on whether it fulfills all 6 criteria in the Rabat Plan of Action's threshold test. And this is a high threshold. The criteria are the context of the expression, its speaker, their intent, its content and form, its extent and magnitude, and the likelihood, including imminence, of incitement against a target group. At the second and intermediate level, certain forms of hate speech may, under international law, be prohibited by states if they meet certain specific circumstances, even if they don't meet the threshold of incitement. So under the key provision of international human rights law, Article 19 of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, certain types of biased expression may be restricted if such restrictions are provided by law, pursue a legitimate aim, such as the respect of the rights of others or the protection of public order, and are necessary in a democratic society and proportionate. So threats or violence or identity-based harassment against minorities, especially in the run-up to elections, may be restricted if they meet this test. Third, and at the bottom level, there are types of hate speech which are the least severe, but these types of hate speech must not be subject to legal restrictions under international law, even though they may contribute to spreading hatred. So this category of speech includes offensive, shocking, or disturbing speech, the condoning or denial of historical events, including the crimes of genocide and crimes against humanity, blasphemous speech, religious insult, and defamation of religions. But just because such types of speech do not warrant legal restrictions, that does not mean they do not demand non-legal responses. Indeed, international human rights law, particularly under the Rabat Plan of Action, encourages policies, practices, and measures nurturing social consciousness and promoting intergroup understanding, including about persons belonging to minorities. So through effective measures in the fields of teaching, education, culture, and information, and also the engagement of relevant stakeholders, including state actors, civil society, and crucially, the private sector. So turning to the private sector, what should social media companies do to respond to online hate speech on their platforms, including against persons belonging to minorities? These companies have responsibilities in relation to that framework that I just presented, in line with the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights. And those responsibilities were clearly set out and elaborated upon by the UN Special Rapporteur on Freedom of Opinion and Expression until this past July or June, David Kay, who in October last year presented a report to the General Assembly on that precise subject. So drawing on that highly significant report, I'm just going to highlight some key recommendations for social media companies. At the general level, they should radically enhance the transparency of their policies and practices and expressly relate their hate speech rules directly to international human rights law and standards, including the Rabat Plan of Action in principle, but also through their practices. And with specific reference to persons belonging to minorities, the report of David Kay can be drawn upon to identify some more specific recommendations. So social media platforms should evaluate how their products and services affect the rights of persons belonging to minorities and make that information public and transparent through periodic human rights impact assessments. They should ensure their hate speech policies evaluate the context, including the harm that persons belonging to minorities might be subject to. And that they should do that by ensuring that human beings are involved in the application of or use of any automation or artificial intelligence tools. They should ensure that persons belonging to minorities, because they are amongst the most affected by hate speech, are involved in the analysis of the context of hate speech. And they should also develop and adopt alternatives to banning of accounts, alternatives such as education, counter-speech, reporting and training that promotes alternative and positive narratives about persons belonging to minorities. So before I wrap up, I just wanted to highlight two other key texts that have just been adopted in the last year or so. The UN Strategy and Plan of Action, which was launched by the Secretary General on the 18th of June last year, which aims at enhancing the UN's own efforts at addressing the causes and drivers of hate speech. This is significant because it, for the first time, does provide a definition of hate speech, but it's not a legal one, and it's primarily for the UN's own actions to counter-address and address hate speech. But it's significant that that definition does include an indication of hate speech directed at persons or groups on the basis of their religion, ethnicity, nationality, race, color, descent, gender, or other identity factor. And the second text I wanted to highlight is the guidance note on addressing and countering COVID-19 related hate speech from May this year, which very clearly indicates that it was very directly motivated by evidence of scapegoating, stereotyping, stigmatization, and vilification of certain individuals, particularly those perceived as Chinese or Asian, and individuals belonging to certain ethnic or religious minorities. It also, like the Strategy and Plan of Action, provides a number of recommendations to social media platforms, which are absolutely in line with international human rights law and its elaboration that I have set out in that three-level typology of different forms of hate speech. So thank you for your attention. I look forward to the dialogue with the other speakers and participants.
Thank you so much, Sejal. This has been extremely interesting, and I would say this confirms how topical this topic is and why it was such a wise choice by the Special Rapporteur to put it under the spotlight of this year's regional forum. It seems that, you know, on one hand, there is now a booming of legislation and case law in many countries, sometimes forgetting about the international standard, which more or less are already settled, at least in their basic framework. So this dialogue between the national and the international regulation is still in the beginning, and there is a lot of room for improvement. On the other hand, it's also, as you rightly pointed out, there is an important role in making aware the big companies that really think big. And the bigger you think, the more likely it is that you forget the details. And minorities are often a detail in their perspective. So sometimes a lack of awareness is simply depending on, looking too much into the broad spectrum and forgetting the rights of people who are not significant from a market perspective. And it is very important that now this message is sent. Now, thank you again, and I look forward to your reply, perhaps the second round of interventions. Now, let me pass the floor to our second speaker, who is Andrei Richter, who is a senior advisor at the OECD Office of the Representative on Freedom of the Media. He is also an academic, has authored more than 200 publications on media law and policy, so he's a great specialist on that. He was also a professor at the School of Journalism in Moscow and has a long-lasting international academic and also on-ground experience in media issues. So he is the person to go for media questions, and therefore we go to him. Andrei, please, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator. I'm also a former interpreter of Russian into English and English into Russian. Therefore, I will try to speak slowly to respect the moderator, to respect the interpreters today. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished Special Rapporteur on Minority Issues, thank you for the opportunity to address this very important forum. Today, speakers at the opening session in the morning, they presented us with what I would call collective keynote speech, which devoted a lot of attention to the most important elements of international legal and institutional framework, which is a topic of just one session, this session. In my presentation, I would like to develop some of these elements already touched upon this morning. And I work at the Office of the Representative on Freedom of the Media of the Organization on Security and Cooperation in Europe, or OSCE. And my presentation will be based on the documents issued by my office, such as this non-paper Propaganda and Freedom of the Media, which is still available online. I will be the third speaker today from my organization, following the director of the Office of the High Commissioner on National Minorities in The Hague, and first deputy director of the OSCE Office for Democratic Institutions and Human Rights. We are all OSCE family. And this might be surprising that I'm the third speaker from OSCE, given that the organization, as is clear from its name, is a security organization. Hence comes my first point, the link between regional security in Europe and hate speech or the rights of the minorities. The Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe deals with the latter issue because of its founding concept of so-called comprehensive security for peace and stability in Europe. It entails more than absence of conflict among the participating states of the organization. Its approach to security includes political, military, economic, and environmental, that is the second dimension, and human aspect, the so-called third dimension of security. We are based on Helsinki Final Act of 1975. Some of us might remember the important event in European history. The Final Act in Helsinki adopted 10 guiding principles, equal guiding principles for relations between the countries, which included respect for human rights and fundamental freedoms, including freedom of thought, conscience, religion, or belief. This, in a way, represented a milestone in the history of human rights protection, because for the first time, human rights principles were included explicitly as an integral element of a regional security framework on the same basis as political, military, and economic issues. But there is another link between hate speech and security issues. Wars are typically started by and accompanied with a propaganda for war. This propaganda, in its turn, in fact, is a form of incitement to violence based on advocacy of national, racial, or religious hatred. In other words, hate speech is an element of the chain reaction that easily brings about the propaganda for war of aggression, and such propaganda often leads to actual wars. Modern history is abundant with examples of funneling aggression, inciting racism and intolerance, which gives rise to military hostilities, genocide, and crimes against humanity. Even today, if you look at the armed conflicts in Europe, current, frozen, or earlier ones, you will clearly see and detect this connection. This phenomenon is also visible from the scholarly works and from the preparatory works of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, which was mentioned many, many times today, and discussions on Article 20, which was also very often referred to, allows to claim that the first paragraph of Article 20, which bans propaganda for war, meant direct incitement to war, while the second paragraph on advocacy of national, racial, religious hatred that constitutes incitement to discrimination, hostility, or violence meant precursory to propaganda for war. And that's why it was considered as one article and one principle. OSCE comprehensive commitments on tolerance and non-discrimination clearly acknowledge threats of manifestations of intolerance and provide actions to prevent and counter them. My second point is related to the general balance between freedom of expression, protected by Article 19 of the ICCPR, and the right to non-discrimination that comes from its Article 20. A study of the interplay between Article 19 and 20 in the case law is an exceptionally interesting exercise, and I would say more an artistic one than scientific. Nonetheless, the process of searching this balance undoubtedly brings us closer to realizing the mutually reinforcing values of free speech and non-discrimination. Anyone interested in the relationship between Articles 19 and 20 would necessarily turn to the General Comment number 11 and number 34, issued and produced by the UN Human Rights Committee. General Comment number 34, which is about freedom of expression, and drafted by one of the keynote speakers this morning, by the way, has become a manual to anyone who studies and interprets the freedom of expression provisions of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. And this document articulates in particular that a limitation that is justified on the basis of Article 20 must also comply with Article 19, paragraph 3. And then that in every case in which the state restricts freedom of expression, it is necessary to justify the prohibitions and their provisions in strict conformity with Article 19. The above conclusions of General Comment number 34 clearly follow the opinions expressed by various scholars and also repeated in other documents approved by the UN Human Rights Committee. It is worth noting that the earlier General Comment number 11 basically on Article 20 does not make such a direct interpretation. It just notes that there is no contradiction between Article 19 and Article 20. The assumption of submission of Article 20 to Article 19, to Article on Freedom of Expression, like other provisions of General Comment number 34, is based on communications which were provided to and reviewed by the UN Human Rights Committee. Unfortunately, this paragraph on the relationship between Article 19 and 20 was built only on one such communication, and therefore I would actually challenge such interpretation of this link. While there is no doubt that there is interconnectivity between all human rights, there are certain merits of scrutinizing the reliability of the compliance conclusion of General Comment number 34. Why? There are several reasons. First, by itself, Article 20 doesn't constitute a human right. While indeed it follows Article 19, and some even refer to it as paragraph 4 of Article 19, Article 20 is separate and establishes a separate norm. Others argue that the strong coherence between the two articles is based on their drafting history, which is true, but it doesn't preclude that one should be under another one. At the same time, it may be seen that Article 20 serves the human rights of non-discrimination and the right to life as specified by Articles 26 and 6. It may also be interpreted in the context of the right of thought as stipulated by Article 18. The aims of these two articles, 19 and 20, are different but complementary. While Article 19, paragraph 3, takes into account the harm that freedom of expression may inflict on the rights or reputation of others, national security, public order, etc., Article 20 aims to prevent loss of life and discrimination against people. Second, there is a major dissonance in the method of enforcement of provisions of Article 20 and paragraph 3 of Article 19. While in Article 20, the Covenant requires specific response from the state, meaning direct legal prohibition by law, Article 19 only allows limited restriction and not prohibition under certain necessary conditions. Thus, the restrictions set by Article 19 are permissive, while those in Article 20 are obligatory. Third, there is no need to take Article 20 in compliance with Article 19. There is a more general common ground for both articles. Article 5 of the ICCPR emphasizes that nothing in the present covenant may be interpreted as implying for any state, group, or person any right to engage in any activity or perform any act aimed at the destruction of any of the rights and freedoms recognized therein. In this sense, freedom of expression under the ICCPR should be rather interpreted as not including hate speech that constitutes incitement to discrimination, hostility, or violence. Regarding the conditions of restricting free expression on these grounds, there is a common reference to paragraph 3 of Article 19, which stipulates that restrictions must be provided by law. Indeed, Article 20 speaks of the same. What is always necessary is to comply with the definition of what is law. And here, general comment number 34, based on the communications to the UN HRC, rightfully points out that a law must be characterized by its formulation with sufficient precision and accessibility to the public. Further, such law may not confer unfettered discretion for the restrictions, and these limitations must conform to the principle of proportionality and not be overbroad. As to the scrutiny of restrictions by the needs of democracy, for some reason, unlike Article 10 of the European Convention, Article 19 of the International Convention does not mention this criteria, as distinct, for example, from other articles in the same convention. On the contrary, Article 20, by design, though not by definition, purports its ban on propaganda for war and hate speech to an ultimate necessity in a democratic society. It is worth noting that the point that it is Article 19 that should be put in the context of Article 20, so as it should not permit greater restrictions on hate speech than Article 20, paragraph 2 requires. Ladies and gentlemen, the mandate of the OSCE representative on freedom of the media, whom I serve since 2011, has just one reference to hate speech. It says that the representative may at all times, I quote, may at all times collect and receive from participating states and other interested parties, for example, from organizations or institutions, from media and their representatives, and from relevant NGOs, requests, suggestions, and comments related to strengthening and further developing compliance with relevant OSCE principles and commitments, including alleged serious instances of intolerance by participating states which utilize media in violation of the relevant OSCE principles. Apparently, intolerance by participating states which utilize media was even then in 1997 an issue of main concern. Therefore, to conclude with recommendations, allow me to cite the last two paragraphs from the communique on freedom of expression and freedom of the media as a vital condition for tolerance and non-discrimination, which was issued by the OSCE representative on freedom of the media back in 2015. She said, intolerant speech should be primarily fought with more speech and media literacy. This needs a diverse, inclusive, and vibrant civil society, both at the national and the international level. The media can support this by observing ethical standards, giving a voice to different parts of society, and facilitating dialogue among different groups. As well, governments should directly engage in different forms of tolerant speech or even counter-intolerant speech. They should also facilitate the conditions for a pluralistic speech and media environment, as well as adopt measures aimed at enriching discussions and influencing emotions in order to avoid all forms of aggression. Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you so much, Andrei. This was very insightful, in fact, and especially in the first and in the last part of your presentation, you made crystal clear the reason why the OSCE has an institution called the Representative on Freedom of the Media. The link between a free media environment and conflict prevention is, of course, very, very relevant. And we all know how much influence a distorted media environment can have on security overall. And especially, of course, when this targets marginalized groups. So I think you have provided a lot of food for thought in respect of the importance that this subject has for preserving the main, the main good that we all have to strive for, which is, of course, peace and security. So thank you very much for that, and I am sure that there will be some comments and reactions also from the floor. But before that, we go to the third speaker in this panel, who is Antonia Petricic. Antonia is assistant professor in the Faculty of Law at the University of Zagreb, and she is currently serving as a member of the Advisory Committee on the Framework Convention for the Protection of National Minorities in the Council of Europe. So she will be focusing especially, I guess, on the work of the Advisory Committee on that. She's also a member of the Croatian Ombudswomen's Human Rights Council. So she is very much a human rights person, and I'm very happy to pass the floor to Antonia.
Okay, I hope you hear me, and I'm quite certain that you don't see me. I did my best to start the video. I would like to request the permission of the organizer to unblock my video because I would like to start the presentation. I will, okay, start my video. Here it is. Perfect. Great. Nice to meet you, all of you, in this new normal way of doing professional things. And thank you all for being present and for having interest in this indeed important topic. Obviously, hate is a powerful emotion, as fear is, and hate speech is easily manipulative, and its mobilization likely leads to violation of human rights. In addition, hate speech is demolishing foundations of liberal democracy and societal cohesion. Given all those are foundation or founding principles of the Council of Europe. It does not come as a surprise that this organization has been addressing the phenomenon of hate speech since late 1980s, and my role at this panel is to present human rights-based legal and institutional framework developed within this organization for tackling the hate speech. All work done in the framework of this human rights organization is based on the understanding that anti-hate speech measures must be well-founded, must be proportionate, non-discriminatory, that they may not be misused to curb freedom of expression or assembly, nor to suppress criticism of official policies, political opposition, and of religious beliefs, and that those measures must involve citizens, governments, and private sector. Due to the work of the Committee of Ministers, the Council of Europe was the first international organization to have adopted an official definition of hate speech back in 1997, when Committee of Ministers passed the recommendation on hate speech. The organization political bodies, namely the Parliamentary Assembly, the Congress of Local and Regional Authorities, and the Committee of Ministers had been adopting in addition numerous conventions, reports, and recommendations that had set human rights standards and provided guidance to the member states to help them to deal with hate speech and support victims of it. The European Commission Against Racial Discrimination, ECRI, an expert body that was established back in 1993, which specializes in questions relating to the fight against racism, discrimination, xenophobia, anti-Semitism, and intolerance in Europe, provides guidelines through its general policy recommendations, which policymakers are invited to use when drawing up national strategies and policies. According to General Policy Recommendation number 15 on combating hate speech from 2015, hate speech is based on the unjustified assumption that a person or a group of persons are superior to others. In its recommendation, ECRI had called for speedy reactions by public figures to hate speech, and it also calls for promotion of self-regulation of media, raising awareness of the dangerous consequences of hate speech, withdrawing financial and other support from political parties that actively use hate speech, and criminalizing its most extreme manifestation, while of course respecting freedom of expression. Apart from working on general themes, the ECRI is monitoring the application of hate speech legislation in member states, and it's monitoring also policies and practices of the countries of this international organization. ECRI's findings, along with recommendations as how to each country might deal with the problems it identified, are published in country reports regularly. The Advisory Committee on the Framework Convention for the Protection of National Minority, another expert body responsible for evaluating the implementation of the Framework Convention in state parties and for advising the Committee of Ministers, has contributed to a decrease of hate speech at the European continent and to the fight against discrimination of persons belonging to minorities in European states and societies, by examining how the signatory parties are demonstrating efforts to combat hate crimes and hate speech in its regularly published opinions. The Advisory Committee is treating occurrences of hate speech in political and societal discourse by examining the implementation of the Article 6 of the Framework Convention, which requires the signatory parties to take appropriate measures to protect persons who may be subject to threats or acts of discrimination, hostility, or violence as a result of their ethnic, cultural, linguistic, or religious identity. The European Court of Human Rights, another institution that is making a backbone of the Council of Europe's implementation of human rights, has developed a rich case law on hate speech and incitement to violence. It often had to balance, on the one hand, the need to preserve free speech, and on the other hand, the need to protect individuals' personality rights, the prohibition of discrimination, mutual respect, and understanding with society or public order. And in this respect, the court has noted that the failure to provide redress for insulting expression of hate speech could entail a violation of the positive obligation under Article 8 of the European Convention on Human Rights, which secures effective respect for the right to private life. In its case law, the court has often emphasized the need for strong policies to combat racial and ethnic discrimination as the basis for restricting hate speech. Finally, there was a No Hate Speech movement, a youth campaign initiated by the Council of Europe in 2013. It was led by the EU department of this organization, and its aim was to mobilize young people across Europe to combat hate speech and to promote human rights online. It remained active beyond 2017 when it officially ended through the work of various national campaigns, online activists and partners, and the experience gained by the Council of Europe, the member states and the youth civil society organizations across Europe through this movement, social No Hate Speech movement, illustrates the potential of such an approach in future campaigns to be led across the European continent and globally. The Council of Europe, of course, had been also addressing the proliferation of hate speech online since 2001, when it passed the Convention on Cybercrime, and in 2003, when it passed the additional protocol to the European Convention on Cybercrime on the criminalization of the acts of racist and xenophobic nature committed through computer system, which requires parties to enact appropriate legislation and to ensure that legislation is effectively enforced. The Council of Europe also passed in 2018 recommendation on the roles and responsibilities of internet intermediaries. This recommendation provides guidelines both for the states and internet intermediaries. It is primary for states, according to this recommendation of the Committee of Ministers, to ensure laws, regulation, and policies applicable to internet intermediaries effectively in order to safeguard the human rights of their user. However, internet intermediaries are also held responsible to respect the internationally recognized human rights of their users and of third parties affected by their activities. Finally, relatively recently, the Council of Europe has decided to tackle hate speech through a comprehensive intersectoral approach, as it has been announced earlier this morning in the address of the Council of Europe Director General of Democracy, Ambassador Snežana Samović-Marković, and my colleague who spoke in this panel, Sejal, who is a member of this body. So the Council of Europe has set a committee of experts on combating hate speech as an attempt to combat a phenomenon that constitutes an urgent challenge in all Council of Europe member states. Mandate of this recently established expert body is to prepare a draft recommendation by the Committee of Ministers to member states on a comprehensive approach to address hate speech, including in the context of an online environment. And of course, this draft recommendation is going to build on existing Council of Europe standards and practices related to addressing hate speech. Obviously, having a respectable track record in addressing hate speech through hard and soft law instruments, the Council of Europe is an important international stakeholder for providing guidance on how to counter hate speech against minorities. The human rights framework, built on the case law of the European Court of Human Rights and numerous expert bodies, particularly and primarily the ECRI and the Advisory Committee, will assist in drafting a recommendation on a comprehensive approach to address hate speech. Legal or policy responses to hate speech that this recommendation will encompass need, of course, to take into account a trend of increase of hateful messages in social media against minority groups, refugees, migrant, and asylum seekers. I expect this document also to consider the crucial role of intermediaries, including internet service providers, social networks, and search engines, and who need to be pressured to control, restrict, and to remove the flow of hateful information against minority groups online. I also shared this presentation of mine in the form of PowerPoint presentation that is attached in the chat box. So for all of you who would be interested in having more detailed overview of this institutional and legal framework developed by the Council of Europe, you can, of course, access it by yourself and check it again. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you, Antonia, and also
thank you for respecting the strict time limitation, but there would be a lot more to say, of course, also in terms of soft law and what the advisory committee has produced in terms of thematic commentaries and all that. So there is really a lot of stuff developed at international level. As we have heard also, there is ongoing activity in terms of legislation and case law at national level. So there is really the need to coordinate all these efforts at various levels. And this might be one of the topics that might make part of the recommendations that the special rapporteur might want to issue. Now we have already some requests for the floor. Let me remind you, now we have some 35 minutes max, let's say 30 minutes for the participants' interventions. That must be limited to 2 minutes maximum and should really be focused on the subject of our panel, and also, if possible, targeted to the development of a recommendation. This will help the special rapporteur enormously. After having reminded that, I would like to give the floor to the first speaker who has requested it, who is Anastasia Gricina. Anastasia, do you hear us? Can you jump in? Or shall I move to the next speaker? Let me move to the next one, who is Ela Chenodioglu. Please go ahead.
Hello, thank you for giving the floor to me. My name is Ela Cenudioğlu from Turkey, representing the World Jewish Congress. The World Jewish Congress is the international organization that represents Jewish communities and organizations in 100 countries around the world. As for my recommendations, I have 3. First one is to define anti-Semitism to fight it. The European Parliament, the Council of the European Union, as well as 27 member states, have endorsed the IRA working definition of anti-Semitism. The Digital Services Act should provide guidance and encouragement for platforms to adopt and use the definition to identify and counter anti-Semitic content. My second recommendation is to address anti-Semitism on all social media platforms, including alternative platforms and service providers. While major social media companies have taken significant voluntary steps to counter online hate, individuals and networks of extremists have migrated to smaller alternative platforms. The Digital Services Act must ensure that hate speech, as defined by the existing IT Code of Conduct, is not permitted on any platform. Last recommendation is to mandate comprehensive and recurring data analysis to better understand the spread of anti-Semitism online, including through conspiracy ideologies. Aligned with the protection of privacy and personal data, the Digital Services Act must ensure the availability of data to better understand the mechanisms by which anti-Semitism spreads online. Catalogs of symbols and tropes and mapping of the flow of conspiracies online can be useful starting points. Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you very much. Now the floor to Matías Sábados.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. My name is Matías Sábados. I am also a member of the World Jewish Congress, and currently I live in Czech Republic. I would actually like to concentrate on websites, as they go hand in hand with social media platforms, where they're often cited as quote-unquote reputable sources for the views being espoused in individual posts. Having that in mind, the recommendations would be firstly to block and remove from search engine results links to racist, bigoted, and otherwise hate-spreading websites. Similar to the example which was done with Stormfront in Europe, where in a lot of countries like France, Germany, and Czech Republic, the website itself does not appear in the return search results when searching for it online. But the issue here is that based on the study published by MIT Technology Review, the companies are unable to create programs in order to properly dissect the information. So a potential solution for this issue would be to continually work on lists of internet addresses that would be blocked by search engines in Europe in alignment with online hate speech laws like the one which was adopted in Germany. The second recommendation would be to block hate speech websites through the amendment of net neutrality laws, like the one which was adopted in Europe, the Open Internet Regulation EU 2015/2120. So the Open Internet Regulation allows for 3 types of situations where net neutrality could be waived, but it does not allow for monitoring of content, which is clearly stated in Article 3, second subparagraph. So in order to limit access to websites spreading hate, the Open Internet Regulation may be amended in order to remove the reference in Article 3, second subparagraph, allowing for all content, regardless of whether or not such content is actually a hate crime, to enjoy the protections afforded under the legislation. The said subparagraph could be amended to remove protections for content deemed as a hate crime and to allow for the establishment of an institutional framework where NRAs and BEREC would create single points of contact for NGOs or civil rights groups to bring to their attention websites which are violating hate crime laws. Under such conditions, these websites could have their data flow severely disrupted. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Batia. Next on the list is Tukhami Vu, sorry for the pronunciation, from the Association of Lawyers of Russia.
Уважаемый господин модератор, уважаемые участники форума, меня зовут Чами Ву, и я представляю Ассоциацию юристов России. Сейчас мы все чаще видим проявления жестокости и нетерпимости в школах, в колледжах, практически во всех государствах. И с развитием интернет-технологий и популяризацией социальных сетей агрессия стала также проявляться и на онлайн-платформах. Поэтому сейчас очень важно бороться с агрессией на почве дискриминации и ненависти уже на ранних этапах развития личности путем внедрения уроков психологии в школах, колледжах при содействии воспитателей и педагогов. Особо подчеркиваем роль принятия Кодекса поведения Европейской комиссии для противодействия незаконному разжиганию ненависти в интернете, в борьбе с агрессией в соцсетях. Однако мы отмечаем, что на сегодняшний день отсутствует какой-либо универсальный, международный, общеобязательный документ, который бы регулировал отношения в сети интернет. В разных странах действуют разные нормы и коллизионные привязки, и не во всех государствах урегулирован механизм борьбы с языком ненависти, также с дискриминационными высказываниями в адрес различных меньшинств в интернете. И в связи с этим мы, помимо общепризнанных принципов, считаем важным придерживаться следующих рекомендаций. Это внедрение в школьную учебную программу занятий, посвященных негативным последствиям буллинга и дискриминации в отношении подростков и детей, представителей меньшинств. Поскольку сегодня соцсети играют достаточно важную роль в жизни подростков, то необходимо также уделять внимание вопросу недопустимости проявления ненависти в интернете. Также рекомендуем государственным членам отказаться от запрета обучения на языке меньшинств в образовательных учреждениях. И, наконец, это принятие унифицированного акта, регулирующего правоотношения в сети интернет, в особенности в случаях проявления ненависти и вражды на онлайн-платформах. Также письменные наши более подробные рекомендации переданы через организаторов. Благодарим за внимание и предоставленное слово.
Thank you so much. Now it seems that the connection has been re-established with Anastasia Gricina. Let me just remind to all of us the rules, let's say, of this forum. The special rapporteur has really encouraged the participants not to pre-read written statements, to stick to the topic and to provide recommendations. And of course, as we are in a UN setting, to uphold UN standards to countries and territories. Having reminded us all of these rules, I would like now to invite Mrs. Gricina to take the floor. Please.
Hello.
To the topic and to provide recommendations.
Hello. Добрый день. Я Анастасия Гричина, председатель региональной общественной организации «Украинская община Крыма». Учитывая данные по переписи населения 2014 года, украинцы вторая по численности этническая группа населения Крыма, а украинский язык один из 3 государственных языков республики. И как вторая по численности национальность, украинцы Крыма нуждаются в украиноязычном СМИ. Поэтому в Крыму существует и активно функционирует информационное агентство «Крым сегодня», в состав которого входит журнал «Крым сегодня», газета «Крымский вестник» и интернет-портал «Переяславская Рада 2.0». Эти информационные ресурсы созданы для поддержания функционирования украинского языка в условиях политкультурной среды Крыма. На территории Украины существует целое агентство, работа которых направлена якобы на предоставление достоверной информации о Крыме, а по факту данный информационный контент не соответствует действительности. За последние 5 лет рекордное количество фейковых материалов украинских СМИ касались темы так называемого уничтожения в Крыму украинского языка. Теперь якобы украинский язык в Крыму находится в статусе запрещенного. Кроме того, жители полуострова утверждают, что они постоянно подвергаются давлению со стороны знакомых и коллег, если начинают разговаривать на украинском языке. Стоит отметить, что в Крыму особое внимание уделяет развитию и сохранению языков национальных меньшинств, в том числе украинского. Благодаря площадкам информационного агентства «Крым сегодня» украиноязычные люди могут узнавать о событиях, которые происходят в Крыму и мире. Это позволяет убедиться, что крымчане не ограничены в свободе слова и вправе свободно получать, передавать, производить, распространять информацию любым способом и на любом языке. Однако мы регулярно наблюдаем подрывную деятельность, которую проводят различные заинтересованные лица и организации, финансирование которых направлено на информационное сдерживание России. На сегодняшний день известно о многих организациях, которые в своей деятельности отрицают важность признания легитимности волеизъявления крымчан весной 2014 года. В условиях антиконституционного переворота в Киеве занимаются фальсификацией фактов, при этом старательно называя себя журналистами, потому что односторонняя подача фактов и фальсификация – это тоже преступление. Некоторые свободные радио уже имеют большой опыт работы на этом поприще, которую спонсирует Конгресс США. Активное развитие Крыма не остается без внимания соседей, которые всегда держат руку на пульсе любых информационных поводов в Крыму и всегда готовы создать новый путем каких-либо преступных и наказанных действий в отношении мирных граждан. Действительно, вокруг полуострова сжимается кольцо так называемых организаций, или иначе говоря, преступных группировок, на основе которых формируются базы для последующей агрессии против России и Крыма. К сожалению, в эпицентре этой борьбы крымчане, даже если опустить факт того, что против республики и ее народа продолжается тотальная блокада, нарушающая фундаментальные права человека, это вполне очевидно, ведь Крым – это лакомый кусочек, благодаря которому соседнее государство Украина имеет возможность выпрашивать деньги из различных западных фондов, а также притягивать к себе различные финансовые потоки. Крым еще долго будет предметом споров и спекуляций до представителей украинской власти. Официальный Киев сегодня не видит в Крыму людей, а видит способ заработать и выманивать еще больше финансирования для медиапроектов, которые были бы нацелены на фальсификацию фактов. Усиление антироссийской, антикрымской риторики отдельных свободных журналистов никак не влияет на развитие и стабильность Крыма. Thank you.
Thank you. I really would like everyone to stay on the topic and not to address other issues that are, of course, of great importance, but are not part of the discussion today. If there are, in particular, some concrete proposals for recommendations, these are most welcome. I do not see at the moment further hands being raised. I'm going now through the participants list. So if anyone wants to take the floor, we still have time for a couple of interventions. And I would encourage you to do so. If not, we will have more time for the second round for our panelists. So it's up to you. I do not see requests for interventions, so I am very glad to go back to the speakers. Shall we go in the opposite order? So start with Antonia first.
Unmute. Here I am. Well, obviously, in my short initial presentation, I was trying to cover all the aspects and initiatives the Council of Europe has undertaken so far in order to tackle hate speech. What I couldn't unfortunately share with you at that slot of time are numerous and growing, let's say, attempts of the expert bodies in having in mind mostly advisory committee that is overseeing implementation of the Framework Convention in this field. And I would like to draw your attention to the fact that the advisory committee is actually reinforcing legal instruments of the Council of Europe in its opinions and recommendations both to the governments, and that are then being reinforced by the Committee of Minister resolutions, calling upon implementation of the recommendation from 1997 of the Committee of Ministers to member states on hate speech. So this is the source of law that is being mostly recalled in the text of the fourth monitoring cycle, because it's a hard law, of course. The advisory committee is also reinforcing the soft law instruments of another expert body, and that is ECRI. And what would be an interesting to share as an overview, that in its recommendations to governments, the advisory committee is dealing explicitly with, under the Article 6, with ethnically motivated crimes and hate speech. And among others, it has urged some authorities of some member states to the Framework Convention to condemn systematically and in timely fashion all instances of anti-minority and anti-immigrant rhetoric in public discourse, particularly in the political arena and in the media, then recalling the source of recommendation as the one that should be looked upon as a model. Or it had called to the authorities to ensure that there is sufficient and effective legal basis for addressing case of hate speech with regard to minorities. I noted very well Francesco's comment that there is a need to coordinate all those different levels within these levels of dealing with certain important issues such as hate speech within a single international organization. The fact is that sometimes the bodies within the organization are overlapping, obviously, in its mandates, and in my opinion are not sufficiently eager to promote the reasoning and the practice of another expert body or another layers of bringing new standards of human rights protection and human rights standards. And this is the area in which I see the improvement within this organization. That would be my comment for the time being.
Thank you, Antonia. And it seems that your comment has inspired some participants to ask for the floor. So I would now give her the floor for 2 minutes. Marian Luca, please go ahead. And if somebody wants to take the floor, please raise the hand with by clicking the button reactions on the bar below. Please, Marian.
Yes, thank you very much for the possibility. I am sorry for this inconvenience. I am Marian Luca. I am a representative of the Roma community, and I am based in Germany. I am speaking today on behalf of my status as former fellow of the OECHR Minorities Fellowship Program. Just a second. So dear Chairperson, the rampant raising of nationalism, populism, and extremism in the last years has proportionally enabled the propagation of hate speech patterns of discourse and behavior in the new social media. The case of Roma minority is again an example of disturbing target to incitement to hatred, violence, and hate crimes, which with the COVID-19 crisis reached a new level of social and institutionalized exclusion. Hate speech and fake news do not only affect the trust in the democratic and pluralistic state order and the rule of law, but denies the general right to protection of personality of each individual, which with particular concern to those belonging to the rights, to the minorities and socially vulnerable groups. Taking action against online hate speech and fostering societal cohesion represent therefore urgent issues. For instance, the German federal government adopted in 2 steps adequate legislation to ban online hate speech with an extension to criminal law. Based on these positive steps on the declaration of the persons belonging to minorities and the advanced legislation on anti-discrimination and equality, I make following recommendations. To initiate and continue a thematic dialogue with civil societies, media, NGOs, human rights defenders, and other responsible stakeholders in order to ensure the proper framework for adopting legislation on combating digital hate speech. To foster a climate of respect to human rights and restore responsive attitudes towards the history and culture of minorities based on recognition and reconciliation. To provide reports based on disaggregated data on hate speech and existing case law, and involve online platform operators to report such data. To ensure the necessary administrative and institutional capacities in order to facilitate the adoption and implementation of such legislation. And finally, to consider the possibility of adoption of an international binding legislation, an example of a treaty on tackling hate speech. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Marian. These are indeed very ambitious recommendations. I hope that something can materialize, but it's certainly very stimulating. I would now pass the floor for the second round of comments to Andrei Richtal. And again, if somebody wants them to make additional comments after Andrei's second presentation, we still have probably the time to do so. Please, Andrei.
Thank you, moderator. Since you and just previous speaker Marian Luca mentioned interest in the OSCE activity on protection of minorities from hate speech, I would like to maybe divert our discussion to another quite important topic of how the minorities suffer more than others during the current public health crisis, and what the governments do and should do in order to avoid such situations in the future and also to prevent such situations from developing further. Our Office for Democratic Initiatives and Human Rights, Democratic Institutions and Human Rights, ADIR, on the 17th of July, published a very important and interesting report which I'll try to show you the cover. I hope you can see anything, but I will also provide a link. It is titled OSCE Human Dimension Commitments and State Responses to COVID-19 Pandemic, which is a big topic, as you understand, but this report has 10 pages devoted to issues of inequality and discrimination, and during the COVID-19 crisis, of course, which provides a lot of information and assessment on the effect of pandemic on national minorities and the ways hate speech proliferates because of COVID, starting with the stereotype that COVID is distributed only by the Asians, or it's a Jewish conspiracy, etc., etc. So there are many examples, but also it has a significant part which is devoted to good practices. I mean, probably today we should also talk about good practices, not only about bad practices. And a number of states, the authorities in support of minorities have lessened, for example, certain restrictions which are equal for all. They lessen them for the minorities as a sign of support of minorities in such difficult times and during such campaigns of intolerance that we experience today. So my second call is basically to draw attention to this report and to urge those interested in the interrelation between human rights and COVID look into the report by OSCE ODIHR on COVID and human rights. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrei. Indeed, this is quite critical, and I guess we have all noticed also in the daily life that the pandemic has had a negative impact on fostering the stereotypes that already existed. I sometimes used to say that the pandemic has been a sort of an accelerator of existing processes, and what was already going on has been just amplified by this, and of course also hate speech in the social media is part of that. We have still two further requests for the floor. The first one is Fuad Pepinov. Fuad, you have the floor. Fuad, are you here? If not, we move to the second. What? So the second one is Andrei Basiv.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the organizers of this.
Andrei, your audio is quite bad.
Can you hear me now?
It is quite bad.
All right, I apologize. Not much I can do. So.
Okay, well, yeah. Give a try. Give a try.
Sure.
And Fuad, you're next then.
I'll be brief. So I represent the permanent mission of Ukraine in Geneva, to the UN office in Geneva. We would like, first of all, to thank the organizers of this event for making such a great event happen on such an interesting topic. But we would also like to express our regret that it is used by a number of participants to spread blatant lies against Ukraine and to continue Russia's aggression against Ukraine in the framework of such forums. I'm in particular speaking about the person who claimed to be representing Ukrainian community in Crimea, who has nothing to do with Ukrainian community in Crimea, who is a collaborator with Russian occupation authorities, who is routinely denied to speak at United Nations forums, and who was unfortunately allowed to speak at this forum. We have a number of
Sorry, Andrei, sorry to interrupt you, but it is really, really bad. We can barely hear you. So if you cannot fix it, I think you should perhaps submit it, your point via chat. That would be much appreciated.
It's really that no one can hear me?
It's really bad. No. Okay, let's use the chat and let us know via chat what your thoughts are, because it is really difficult to understand. We can give a try afterwards, perhaps even without the video, if this improves the connection. I don't know. But in the meantime, please, Fuad Pepinov, the floor is yours.
Вы меня слышите? Алло?
Yeah.
Алло? Меня слышно? Да, тогда позвольте я начну, если можно. Алло? Я вас не вижу и не слышу.
Вас слышно и видно, вас слышно и видно.
Могу я начать?
Yes, please, go ahead.
Я Пепинов Фуад, представитель межрегиональной общественной организации месхинских турок, Ахсха турок, в России, в этом. Наш опыт коренного национального меньшинства на постсоветском пространстве, депортированного с родины, до сих пор находится в безуспешной борьбе с государственными институтами за восстановление своих очевидных прав на возвращение на родину в Грузию. Наш долгий опыт говорит о том, что самым мощным и успешным провокатором языка вражды и ненависти в социальных сетях в рамках одной страны являются сами власти. Именно это мы со всей очевидностью испытали и поняли в Краснодарском крае России, и на протяжении многих лет видим это в отношении нас в Грузии. По нашему мнению, власти успешно формируют мнение, на которое потом сами же ссылаются. Государственные институты не отказались от возможностей управлять и корректировать цели и задачи общественных и организаций для своих политических намерений. Они передают свои функции контроля и управления активистам в социальных сетях, путем их моральной или иной поддержки. Для государства это стоит недорого. Это бывает заметно, и неизбежно от простых дискуссий в сетях участники быстро переходят на язык вражды, усиливаемый возможностями сетей. То есть также они поддерживают враждебные отношения к тому или иному национальному меньшинству со стороны большинства по своему выбору. То есть государственные институты являются ответственными за атмосферу взаимной ненависти в социальных сетях. От степени их желания корректировать позиции общества в своих интересах по любой проблеме существенно зависит уровень противостояния и ненависти в сетях. Нерешение нашей проблемы возвращения является следствием откровенной манипуляции от нашем этническом происхождении, начатой государственными институтами еще в СССР и продолжающейся в наше время в социальных сетях, на мнение которых сегодня ссылаются в разных ветвях власти в Грузии, в свою очередь. Мы призываем вас принять резолюцию в адрес, в данном случае, властей Грузии о необходимости реального решения проблемы возвращения депортированного народа на родину, в Грузию, согласно своим обязательствам в Совете Европы. И о несовместимости желания Грузии быть в сообществе стран реальной демократии и нежелании реально решать вопрос о возвращении коренного народа после преступной депортации по этническим причинам. Спасибо, я все, что я хотел сказать.
Thank you, Mr. Pepinov. Now the floor to Sejal for her second and last round of comments. Please, Sejal, go ahead.
Thanks very much. Yes, and thank you to the participants for their comments and recommendations too. I have several, beginning with Ella's first comments, which were appropriately detailed and helpful, I think, especially her focus on the need to remember that it's not just the tech giants that we're talking about, social media powerful platforms that we're talking about, but also the smaller platforms where we see increased migration. And I think it's important that all of us as activists, advocates, policymakers, we have an eye to the Digital Services Act, which, as I said, was is currently in discussion. Second, I would, and this is an important point, especially in Europe, and that is to remember that the German NetzDG faced justifiably significant criticism, particularly, but not only from a freedom of expression perspective, and it shouldn't be viewed as a positive example, albeit one in good faith. Yes, there is a need to address online hate speech for all of its effects that we have seen in Europe and elsewhere. But at the same time, we have to make sure that overbroad, vague restrictions on online content aren't addressed in a certain way, or aren't developed in a certain way, which actually ends up harming exactly those groups and individuals one is trying to protect. So the German law, for example, encourages over removal through vague wording and lack of any definition of what is hatred and incitement, and has led to unintentional problematic consequences. So other countries, Russia, Singapore, Philippines, and others have used the law as an example, as justification for their own legislation, which has been much more far-reaching. So, so let's be careful about using the German law and looking to that as an example, because it encourages overbroad censorship and sets a dangerous precedent. And third, there was a comment helpfully in the chat function by Murtaza Sheikh, talking about the Rabat Plan of Action, which has been part of the international law framework for some time now, but has only recently it's been realized that it's a tool not only for states and in particular courts and prosecutors in identifying the types of incitement to hatred which deserve to be criminalized, but actually, and this is quite a recent development, I think probably in the last year or so, it's been supported by the former Special Rapporteur David Kay, and I think he even mentions it in his report, I think, that is that this six-part threshold test can be used as a gauge to assess the severity of hate speech. So it's a cumulative test, and if all 6 criteria are met to a high level, then yes, that speech ought to be criminalized. And I think social media platforms can use that justifiably as a framework for determining when they should take down speech. Of course, we also have that incitement to genocide, which clearly should be taken down too. But that top level of hate speech, which I identified in my earlier presentation, I think social media companies should feel confident about taking that down. We know that these companies, in particular, Facebook, Twitter, Google are well aware of the existence of the Rabat Plan of Action, and I've been a very strong advocate for them actively incorporating it and using it in their training, of their moderators in particular. Okay, I think those were the 3 points I had to make, but just to sort of revise those 2 points, a cautionary note or cautionary approach when it comes to the German law and others that have followed after it. And the Rabat Plan of Action is more generally useful for platforms too. Thanks.
Thank you, Sejal. I think these are important additions also in order, to be critical with regard to the different legislation that is coming up, and sometimes looking more carefully at the international standards before drafting legislation might be helpful. I see Andriy is back, and I would really invite him to take the floor. Let's give a try with the audio. If the audio is not good enough, you can try without video. But I would really like to have you, Andriy, also come to.
How is it now? Is it better?
Go ahead and have a try.
All right. So first of all, thank you for giving me the floor, and I would like to thank, on behalf of the Permanent Mission of Ukraine here in Geneva, to the organizers of this event. No? I would also like to express my regret that this event is used for the purposes of spreading blood and lies about Ukraine, and to continue basically Russian aggression against Ukraine through the participation of a number of representatives who are voices of Russia propaganda rather than genuine defenders of the rights of minorities. I'm particularly speaking about the person who was talking on behalf of the Ukrainian community in Crimea, who has nothing to do with the Ukrainian community in Crimea, and who delivered her statement which had nothing to do at all neither with hate speech nor social media. So we have a number of participants from Ukraine, from our governmental agencies, who are ready to share Ukraine's experience on the topic of this forum, and we hope that this forum will continue with strict adherence to the United Nations General Assembly resolutions that regulate the status of Crimea. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Andriy. I'm not sure that everyone has got the point, at least those not listening to the Russian translation. Maybe the translation was clearer because the audio could be better. In any case, I think we got more or less some of the points, and thank you for raising them. I would like to come to a close because it's exactly the time we had at our disposal for this panel, which was very topical and extremely interesting. I'm sure you agree with me on that. I don't know whether Fernand de Varenne would like to say a famous last sentence for at least this panel without anticipating too much what he's going to say after the forum.
The only thing I would add at this point is that this has been an extremely insightful and interesting panel. It's been challenging also. There's a few concepts that have been raised which I will need to reflect on. And I'm very much looking forward to tomorrow when we can try to bring all of these elements together. But let me say once again, thank you to all of the panelists. Thank you, Francesco, also for chairing very well this session. And thanks to all the participants. And by the way, we actually have quite a large number of participants. There were almost 250 registered participants. This morning we had quite a large group. And we still have quite a large participation even this late in the day. So for everyone, thank you very much once again for well done, job well done.
Thank you. So I can just tell you, let's reconvene tomorrow at 9 a.m. Central European Time. It will be equally interesting. So looking forward to the third and the fourth session. Thank you so much for your attention and for your valuable contributions. It has been a pleasure and looking forward to continuing the discussion. Thank you all.
Merci. Thank you.